This episode is brought to you by the Project Manga Patreon, the best way for viewers to support the project and allow us a means to keep providing new and quality content to our subscribers. Go to patreon.com/projectmanga and find out more about the perks we have available to patrons, including early access to all of our content and exclusive videos like behind-the-scenes footage and additional manga reviews. That's patreon.com/projectmanga. And welcome back to One Shots. I'm Knox.
And I'm Melionis.
This is our live manga podcast. I'm sure that most of you are familiar, but for those who aren't, we have a couple of different shows. The Project Manga Podcast and the Special Grade Podcast and Tangential Tie-Ins and now One Shots. The Project Manga Podcast and like Special Grade Podcasts are weekly manga review podcast that we have where we deep dive the newest chapters in a multitude of different Weekly Shonen Jump, Weekly Shonen Magazine, and Jump Plus manga. Tangential Tie-Ins is general anime and manga discussion topics that cover a variety of different shows and series. But then there's One Shots, and this is where we hone in, we zone in, and we choose a specific series, choose a topic for it, and then break that down for however long, usually around an hour and a half, 2 hours. But this is a chunky one, so I guess we'll see what's going on with it and how long it'll be. But we're talking about Goodbye Eri tonight. We'll try to be as comprehensive as possible, but this is a big one, you know, like I said, so we probably don't want this to be like, you know, a 4 or 5 hour thing, because it's already pretty late in the night. But we'll do our best, and we hope you all enjoy the show, the discussion, the conversation. We're here on Twitch now, but this will be going on YouTube eventually, so we'll throw the VOD up on Patreon first so that our early access people can have it for a bit before it does premiere on YouTube. So if you can't stay for the whole thing, or if you know, have to leave early, you know, or something like that and want to watch the whole thing, you can catch it there, or you can wait for it to hit YouTube, whatever works best for you. But speaking of, there will be links down in the chat so that you can follow us on YouTube, join our Discord community, follow us on Twitter or whatever. And of course, there will be links for the Patreon down there too. Thank you, Yato, by the way, for hooking up the links. But Goodbye Eri review. It's the newest one shot from Fujimoto Tatsuki, the creator of Chainsaw Man and Fire Punch. And this one's pretty heavy, man. I feel like we can just get right into it. We can just get right into the festivities. Thank you all so much for joining us, by the way. We got a lot of familiar faces in the chat, and some new faces as well. So shout out Yato, shout out Anime Summit, shout out Comrade V, Madly Boo. Whole lot of gang shit, man. Welcome. But yeah, Goodbye Eri, man. Okay, so I think that the way that we're gonna structure it is we're going to have like different chapters of the conversation. So like this will be a little bit more relevant when it finally goes to YouTube, and you'll have like, you know, in the description all of the links to specific timestamps that allow you to jump from like one part of the conversation to another. So we're going to be talking about the premise. That's going to be a more non-spoilery kind of area of the conversation, where we just talk about like literally the plot and the setting and things about the story that don't really require too much, you know, deep diving or spoilers. And then we're going to go into like the first cool thing that we noticed that jumped out at us. Then we're going to go into art. Then we're going to go into the characters inside of the story of Goodbye Eri. And then we're going to go into like specific scenes that we wanted to talk about. Then we're going to talk about major plot points. Then we're going to go into themes. We're going to try to interpret the message of the story. And then we're going to go into final thoughts. So if you're watching on YouTube, you will see timestamps so that you can navigate yourself through the conversation. But yeah, what's up, everybody? What up, Mello? What's good, fam? How you feeling, bro?
I'm feeling really good. I've had a great couple days, and things are looking up.
And we're finally talking about Goodbye Eri. I'm glad that we were able to do that. Oh yeah, this used to be like a bi-weekly show. When we first started One Shots, it was a bi-weekly show. And then it became a monthly show. And then now our IRL schedules have basically put us into a position where One Shots and tangential tie-ins are an either or show for whenever Weekly Shonen Jump is on break. So Weekly Shonen Jump is off this week. We have no new chapters, so naturally there is no Project Manga podcast. So in lieu of that Weekly Shonen Jump manga coverage, we are doing this one-shot episode talking about Goodbye Eri. So let's get it. All right. Well, we're gonna move into the conversation now. So this obviously is, like I said, a non-spoiler area of the conversation for anybody who hasn't read Goodbye Eri yet. We're gonna talk about the premise lightly. So basically, this is a story where our main character Yuta chronicles the last days of his mother's life with his like camera phone, with his like smartphone. I don't know what time this takes place in, but it looks like a phone is able to record the entire story. So it seems to be rather modern or contemporary in that way. But yeah, mom's gonna die, wants to film the entirety of her last days on Earth while also recording the footage for a project in school, probably like an end of the year project, if I remember correctly, where you kind of just make a movie, and he's kind of like woven the last days of his mom's life into that project, and that's kind of what we're talking about and what we're reading about in this series. Mello, how do you feel about the premise of Goodbye Eri?
You know, I thought the premise was really interesting because I also had a parent pass from illness very similar to what was happening on with Yuta's mom.
Mm-hmm.
So like for me, this story was something that like immediately resonated. Like I was like, all right, cool, I understand this. And like I grew up in a time and a place in my life where like we didn't take a lot of pictures as a
Mm,
family. We didn't record anything. So I was like, that's really interesting to kind of see how that kind of like dynamic of like I understand the idea of like wanting to have memories to look back upon instead of having things in your brain and just like have those fade, or like reliving those memories to the point that like you've maybe added parts that aren't quite there.
right.
There's a level of honesty and dishonesty to photographs and film,
You're right,
you
right.
know,
Yeah.
like the more you see the less you know, that kind of thing. It's a
That's a
secret
really
about a secret.
cool, yeah, that was a really cool thing to say, that there's a level of honesty and dishonesty to photographs, because obviously photographs show you what's happening in a specific moment, but obviously it lacks the context of that moment. So that was a really
Yeah.
cool notion.
The premise is pretty solid. I mean, it's heavy because it starts on like this kid's like 12th birthday.
Yeah.
He gets a phone for the first time, which is really awesome. But then also just like, hey, you know that little high you're riding right now, sport? Bam! Smack to the face. I might be dying. You should record me so that you have these in posterity, just in case things don't go well.
Yes. Yeah. And another thing about like the premise of any Fujimoto Tatsuki story is that you can guarantee that it's going to be wildly unique. You know what I mean? I can't say that I remember any time in manga where I read a story like this. And I always have to say that whenever it's Fujimoto Tatsuki work. You know what I mean? Like it's always just like, oh my God, this is such an interesting angle to take on something that's either familiar or brand new. You know what I mean? For somebody, no matter what it is, there's that Fujimoto stank on it that just lets you know, like right away, this is unlike anything that you've ever seen before. And that's something that I like really appreciate about Fujimoto's work, is that it's always going to be fresh. You know what I mean? In one way or another.
It took me back so many different ways.
Yeah.
Like, and this guy's been doing since Fire Punch. Since Fire Punch, he has had like very plainly put the stamp of I'm a movie lover. Like we've said it a couple times before in different things when we were covering Chainsaw Man. The guy is the Quentin Tarantino of manga. You know, like
Yes.
he references so much and so heavily, and like even it's like just referencing like the industry, because in this particular one he only makes like two like face value movie references,
Mm.
but otherwise he keeps it like, but he still has that kind of touch on it,
Mm-hmm,
like
mm-hmm.
um the first few pages that I noticed, like the like first 16 pages were all done in this sort of panel like this, which is reminiscent to like widescreen smartphone kind of things. But then it also reminisces to like 77 millimeter film cuts. So if you like just Google those kind of things, you can see exactly what I'm talking
What he's
about.
going for, right? Exactly.
And it's almost all the panels. Like you can probably count the panels that aren't done in that style on like two hands,
Oh
maybe
wow.
three,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, and I remember the first time that I like a couple years ago I tweeted, Fujimoto Tatsuki is the Quentin Tarantino of manga or whatever I said. I don't know. You could probably go to my account and search like Tarantino and see the tweet that I'm talking about. I can't remember exactly how I worded it, but I want to say I remember people being like very confused about that statement because like you said we've been talking about this comparison for a while now since we pretty early into our Chainsaw Man coverage we started talking about how reminiscent of Quentin Tarantino work a lot of what Fujimoto Tatsuki did inside of Chainsaw Man, kind of reminded us of Quentin Tarantino or whatever. But I remember people being like, "What are you talking about? That I don't know. It might be a little bit too early, blah blah blah." But then since then, we got Look Back, we got obviously Fire Punch
Mm,
preceded it, and I haven't read Fire Punch. I want to assume he's the same kind of creator in Fire Punch as he is in Chainsaw Man and everything that came out subsequently.
it's
But
grim.
yeah, I remember people being like, "I don't know about that one, buddy," and then like every project that comes out since Chainsaw Man has kind of just like further solidified that Quentin Tarantino vibe. You know what I mean? For me, at least. And and yeah, I don't know. I want to talk about that like more like when it comes into like the first thing you noticed like segment or maybe even the art segment or maybe the dialogue like when we start talking about dialogue and things like that. But I'm glad that you brought up the Tarantino stuff because I definitely wasn't, or I was going to if you didn't. So I'm glad that we're
No,
on the
I got
same
the
page
covers.
with that. I don't remember if we ever actually like, because I know that you joined the show later, after Chainsaw Man had ended. So I
Yeah.
couldn't remember if we had ever specifically talked about that comparison, but I'm glad that you brought it up and that we're on the same page in that way.
Oh yeah, and like this is like definitively like Siva mentioned in the chat. It reads like a short movie. Like I was doing like a kind of a listing of like some of my favorite scenes, and I was doing like little page numbers for that. I noticed that each scene themselves was about 10 pages. So
Mm,
he's dedicating several like 10-page chunks to very specific scenes, and like the whole thing is like played out like in small like very subtle physical differences
yeah.
to kind of cover the sense of motion and passage of time, which is very interesting in that sense.
Oh yeah. I wasn't expecting us to spend too much time on the premise conversation because the longer you spend in a non-spoiler area of conversation, at least for us, I feel like the harder it is to keep spoilers out.
Oh,
So,
yep.
yeah. So, like, I don't know if you had anything else that you wanted to say on the non-spoiler side of things, but like, I'm ready to get into the meat and potatoes of this one personally. So,
All right, let's eat. Come
all right,
on, let's
cool,
do
cool.
this.
So here's your warning now. If you haven't read, Goodbye Eri by Fujimoto Tatsuki, either stop watching right now and go read it, or if you are going to stick around and haven't read Goodbye Eri, it means you don't care. So
It's just our take on
about
it.
spoilers, right?
And there is a beauty to like reading it raw without
Yeah,
having any like thing. So if you feel like you need to go lurk and quick read it, it's a quick fast read. But at the same time, I've read this thing like 4 or 5 times,
right,
and
right.
it's like watching like I watched Mad Max Fury Road 5 times in theaters. Like I still loved it. I
Yeah,
still enjoyed it. There was
yeah.
things that I kept picking up here and there, smaller things. I'm like, hey, I didn't notice that. I didn't notice that. And even though like I knew what was going on, it's still very valid
Right.
and still very powerful. Like it's very this one doesn't hold any punches back
Yeah,
emotionally.
yeah,
This
for
got
sure.
me in my feels for sure.
Hell yeah, man.
Uh,
Well, I think we're ready to get into it, right? Right? Okay. So, first thing you notice, first thing that kind of like jumped out at you, And was a significant thing that you were like, okay, goodbye, Eri. I see what you're doing here. I see you're out here. You know what I'm saying? Like, what was kind of the first thing that jumped out at you in that way? Mello, why don't you go ahead and hit us
Uh,
with what you got?
the part that like really kind of got to me was the first few pages where the kid's hiding his face, right, with the
Mm-hmm.
camera. And he's like, I don't know how to feel about this. Um, I don't think it's like I'm just so confused. I'm not even sad. And then he pauses and he's like, no, I'm sad. And then
Yeah.
it goes straight into like that picture of like a grasshopper being torn apart by ants
Mm-hmm.
and like that kind of classic anime just art film kind of thing where
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
just like
yeah.
you zoom in on it's like ah yes this symbolizes the decay clone high school Genghis Khan's a star baby you know
Yeah.
it had that moment and I was like oh that's like really heavy and then like two-page turns to like page 18 19 and it's like explosions Michael Bay explosions and I'm like wow
Michael
I
Bay.
it was
It's
and
so
like the
funny that like whenever you see explosions in anything that is either actually a movie or trying to feel like a movie, just go, that's Michael Bay type beat. You know what I
the Michael
mean?
Bay and like the kid does admit because like when he's talking to Ari
Yeah.
she's like what movies have you seen and he's like you know the ones they show on TV and she's like that's not enough you need to like watch more movies so you can know what a good movie could be
Yes.
and I was just thinking, he's like, that's why he put explosions in, because he only watched the movies that were on TV. It
Yo.
doesn't matter that like his mom was a TV producer. It doesn't matter if his dad did theater in college or post college and stuff. You know, he's just like, yeah, no, I'm just watching shit on TV. I'm 12 years old. What do you
Yeah, yeah,
want?
like come on, man. Like this is my end
uh,
of middle school project. Like you're fucking like hitting me with some Ebert
I
and
think it
Roper
was a
type shit.
talent show.
Yeah,
I
talent
think it was
show,
a talent
whatever it
show
is.
because like
Yeah.
right after that, the kids are like, they're like, we're gonna do a band, and the band just like rags on it. It was like, yeah, what the
Yeah.
fuck was that? How's that? That's hard to follow, man. Like that was depressing and lame. Anyway, here's our song.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Uh,
I think
but that was the first cool thing that I noticed because
yeah,
I was
and
just like,
yeah, and that is cool as hell, bro. Tradition, gifting subs. Gifted a tier 1 sub to Yato. Thank you. Hell yeah.
first a raid, then subs. You're a sweetheart. Thank you
Yeah,
so
dude,
much.
that's amazing. Thank you very much for
Oh,
that. But yeah, I don't
um,
know, man. The first thing that I kind of noticed right away is just like the atmosphere of the whole like story, right? Because it's like we were talking about like how similar to Fujimoto Tatsuki, or I mean how similar to Quentin Tarantino Fujimoto Tatsuki can be, and I feel like both of them are really good at creating atmospheres for whatever kind of scene that they're writing. The
mhm,
atmosphere always feels like there is an air of uncertainty and uneasiness, and obviously inside of Fujimoto Tatsuki's work this is a combination of dialogue and perspective in the shots that he uses, and character facial expressions and things like that all go into the atmosphere, similar to how Quentin Tarantino composes a scene with his actors and the shots that he uses and the demeanors and facial expressions that he makes sure that his actors kind of portray. You never know if things are going to turn sour at any moment. You always have a feeling that's like kind of like nagging in the back of your head, no matter how mundane the dialogue is, no matter how chill a scene can be. You never know if you're going to turn the page into an explosion or a murder
mm,
or some crazy line of dialogue that completely changes the overall vibe and atmosphere of the scene. So I don't know if this is something that is only obvious to me because I have a history with Fujimoto Tatsuki and knowing that his work
mm.
can go left at any moment in the writing. I don't know if that's like something that comes from history or if that is something that is just blatantly apparent to anyone who views his content. But like I want to say that anybody, whether Goodbye Eri is the first Fujimoto Tatsuki work that they've seen, or Chainsaw Man or Fire Punch or Look Back or whatever, I want to say that that's something that can be noticed like right away inside of his art and inside of his work is like this atmosphere is, you know, seems very normal and regular, but I don't know, something about it just makes me feel uneasy, like something bad could happen at any moment. That's kind of like the overall vibe that I get from Fujimoto Tatsuki atmospheres, and I feel like we get that in Goodbye
I
Harry
think
too.
I think that that was intentionally, very intentionally done, especially within like the specifics of Eri. So like if you don't have like a history of like reading Fujimoto's work, you know, the explosions set you up for the expectation that the sudden and like the unexpected will be on the table.
Right.
So it like as a raw thing, one shot without having any reference to their previous works. There's that.
Yeah.
With like the air and like the whole like it's like the ruined birthday, right?
Yes.
Like the whole like it's a positive thing and then the language slowly cuts that down to
Yes.
small pieces and then it's just a sad slice of cake and you're like, well, like, at least I have this little piece of cake, but now you have responsibilities and
Right.
this heaviness that you're putting on a 12-year-old. Like only one person put like mentions that, and I think that was Ari on like, oh, I don't remember what page anymore. I don't think I wrote it down.
No, for
But she
sure.
says this, she says it's like, yeah, don't you think it's a little fucked to put that on a 12-year-old kid
Yeah.
to like record you up to your like own death?
Hmm.
And it's just like
Yeah.
it makes sense that he runs away. And so the structure is there's the birthday. He's told, "Hey, please record me just so you have the memories." But like, there's that heaviness going on within the series.
Yes.
Um, then he does it. He puts his own spin. He adds an explosion because he didn't personally, you know, witness or record his mother's death because he couldn't. He
He
was
couldn't
12.
be there, right?
He couldn't be there. And I think that like using explosions is a good way to, you know, do that because as a kid, you know, even a kid can recognize that an explosion is bright but short-lived.
Yes.
And you know, like fireworks are fleeting, and so
Yeah.
was his mom's life. So I feel like
Oh
him
shit.
putting explosions in the thing, and like the idea of like, you know, it's like or like blowing up the hospital, right? Like it was
Yeah.
explosions for the hospital, and he's like, you know what, they're like in real life, you know, if someone dies in a hospital, the hospital remains. But for like him, as a kid who is wildly imaginative, his own father says, you know, everything you've done is with a pinch of fantasy.
Yeah.
It's like page 80, 81.
Yeah.
He says like everything you do is with a pinch of fantasy. And so like, you know, if you're a kid and it's like it's like half of your whole world crumbles, right? Like it's gone. There's a huge demolition. So I think explosions are very fitting. And
Yeah.
so like,
That's actually a really good point. Wow.
yeah, and it's kind of hard to see that kid get ragged on for that because it's the audience's like expect social expectations. They have expectations that were not met, and therefore they are angry. As
Yes.
opposed to this is just this is my project. This is how I was a kid. I wanted to do this way because I felt like this, and I don't have the tools or like the broad worldly understanding to articulate what I'm feeling. I'm just a kid. Um, and then they just rag on him. The teachers, the adults. There was the nameless best friend of
Yeah, yeah,
Harry
towards the end or whatever.
was like, "Yeah, no, my mom died the year before, and I can never forgive you for that. It wasn't a bad movie, but why'd you add explosions at the end?" And it's
Right.
just like, and even a person that could relate in that similar situation simply doesn't because different people.
Yeah.
Um, and this kid like is feeling the worst. He wants to die. He's gonna throw himself off the hospital of where his mom lived
Right.
and died. And he meets someone else who recognizes him and says, "Hey, I liked your movie. It
Yeah.
wasn't great, but it wasn't like as
Yeah.
bad as everyone else made it out to
Yeah,
be."
it's like I'm a peer. I'm in like your class, but like I'm also like kind of low key a film critic and like I see your
Mhm.
potential here. So like why don't we talk more about like what you did in this film instead of you jumping off of this building, and then we can see if we
Yeah.
can find some like new value in your life that'll help you kind of like cling on to it. You know what I mean? So like that was like a really cool scene. And the last thing that I kind of like wanted to touch on in regard to Fujimoto and Quentin Tarantino comparisons before we move on is the use of subtext. You know what I mean? Like subtext in Fujimoto Tatsuki work is just as cared about, I want to say, as Quentin Tarantino kind of like handles it. Like you get these very mundane conversations inside of
Hmm.
Fujimoto Tatsuki's work. You know what I mean? Whether it's Look Back or Goodbye Airy or Chainsaw Man or whatever else that he's done, there is always a air of like we're having a regular conversation, but like we're saying so much more beneath the surface and in between the lines than we're actually delivering to each other in real time. And whether or not like some crazy thing happens inside of the narrative that comes from blatant dialogue or whatever, no matter what, you always get that sense of this conversation feels real. You know what I mean? This conversation sounds organic. It sounds like two characters actually talking to each other because in natural conversation, there is a lot of subtext that people can just naturally pick on from a lifetime or pick up on from a lifetime of just talking to people. That's like how people, communicate a lot of things by saying one thing that says something on a surface level, but you really mean another thing underneath that people are normally naturally just able to pick up on in conversation. When you put that into fiction and you actually like write a story that's using that same kind of device, I feel like one, it's a lot harder to do, and two, it's a lot more impactful when you notice it. You know what I mean? Because like when you're just having a conversation with someone and you pick up on the subtext of things that they're saying, it's so natural, it's so regular, it's an everyday thing. When you then
Hmm.
go into a novel or a comic book or a manga or a movie and you notice that same thing happening, it gives you, like a deeper appreciation for the writer writing it because of how realistic they made that feel. And it's almost like an unconscious thing because it's like, I don't know if a whole lot of people actively notice subtext in conversation. So the fact that you can grab that as a writer, focus it, and put it into your story in a way that a lot of people might not even notice consciously, but it still hits the same for it is really impressive. So
I think it actually takes a lot of skill to write someone who is not very articulate, and do it well.
yeah,
Like they made Yuta to be like a not very insightful, but like hardworking, very diligent character, right? Like he was like, I don't, I want to do the thing. I'm not very like clever, and I'm not very insightful of like my internal self, but he does put a lot of care and does have like a very solid eye for detail, and like
yeah,
it like it's hard to like it's easy to write smart people, right?
yeah,
But it's hard to write dumb people that sound like they're actually trying and not just like a caricature of a dumb person.
right.
Like, take Letterkenny, for example.
Oh
The,
man,
the, the editing style to create their phrasing and like the rapid staccato of like their witticisms and like back and forth barbs,
yeah,
you know, that doesn't sound natural. No one talks like that.
right.
But it is used well within the show,
Well,
and
that's because
they
it's a
they do.
comedy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
They
like
do
when
it
you're
very
doing a
well in the
comedy,
show.
you can break immersion as
Hmm.
much as you want, as long as it's for the sake of comedy. You go into comedy shows and books and movies with an idea that you're constantly suspending disbelief for the sake of a joke. So it doesn't matter if things are inorganic or if things are unrealistic because it's comedy.
But yeah, Fujimoto makes a lot of like really organic sounding like dialogue.
Yes.
The fact that like people will ask like the filler state stances where like he'll say what, there was this moment like they were talking about like pages 68 to 71. He's like, hey, you do a little peace sign for every like little victory the character has, and it's like, and she's like, so what, every time you see nipples you go, oh yeah, and he's like, no I don't, no I don't, do two, no I don't, and then there you cut to them watching the movies and he goes, yeah. And she's like, you did the thing. And he's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, he's confused. He's confused. He's not that bright. And like he's still confused. And then like I love the realistic confusion and like asking questions like, "Hey, no, what do you mean?" And she's like, "No, I'm done. I don't care. The moment's over.
Right.
It's not worth talking about." And he's like, "Now I'm bothered. I can't watch this movie." And she's like, "Shut the fuck up and watch the movie."
Yeah. It's like I'm trying to give you the keys to film analysis while also watching the movie in a way to where we can probably absorb or osmosis the
Mhm.
themes and storytelling. So just shut the fuck up. Let me say my little Ebert and Robert side comments and just chill. You know what I'm saying? Uh,
Yeah, and I liked his confusion. There was the scene after the dad gives his like acting bit, and he's like, "Was that good?" And like she's like, oh, you did really good." It's like, "Oh, thank you so much." And
yeah.
like the way he had like little filler words in between, like gratitude, and then he's like,
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
I used to do this in college, and then stuff
Yeah.
like that. It was like small details like that that
Yeah.
kind of like really got to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Added the
love that.
realism, and then there's that twist in this. There's multiple twists in the series,
Right.
um, where there is like I know she says this one line. I had a hard time discerning
Well,
reality and fiction.
real quick before we go like into like specific scenes and
Oh
whatnot.
yeah.
Yeah. Why don't you just for a moment? I'm actually like gotta like run like 2 feet over here for a second. Kick it with the chat real quick. Yeah, kick it with the chat real quick, and I'll come back,
No
and then we can get
worries.
into like yeah. Give me 2 seconds.
Absolutely. So, guys, what have you guys been liking about this series so far? It's me, the one who's in Paris. The authenticity? Ah, man. I really enjoyed that. Um, oh yeah. Well, thank you, V. Man, I'm really excited for Ranger Reject coming up. Absolutely, tradition. It was extremely cathartic. There were so many emotional payouts, and I will touch on the fact that like there were parallels within the whole story, like literally parallels going through, and so there's like a double tap of catharsis. Yeah, I totally get that tradition. Appreciate the introspective of a young.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you guys. Yeah, let's take a moment just to like see what's cracking with the chat here real quick. Sorry, live shows are tough. Okay.
Yeah, for
Yeah, it's
sure,
fun.
absolutely.
Yeah.
The introspective's rough. Iggy, yeah, I loved MC's and Aries' chemistry. I loved that moment at the end with the friend, which is like, so you just did what your girlfriend wanted you to do, and he's like, oh, actually, we were not dating. I asked her out, and she turned me down. But like, it's hard to tell whether or not they actually had feelings for each other. Same with the whole like vibe of whether or not anything was real, you know?
Oh yeah.
Um,
Roll Ray made a really cool comment. What's up, Roll Ray? By the way.
yes, it reminded
Yeah, he
me.
said
Oh
there
god.
should. Oh, sorry. What were you saying?
Oh, the found footage idea.
Yeah,
Yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
Like I was just gonna say, there should. Like, Roll Ray says there should be more found footage manga though. Imagine a horror one, and that's a really good point because you think about things like Cloverfield or
Hmm.
like Wreck. I don't know if you guys saw Wreck. I think it was like a. Can't remember which area of Europe it came from. I wanted to say Italy, but I can't remember. But it's like the one that Quarantine was based off of. Anyway, found footage shit is fire in
I
film.
love
Yeah, and it's like I can't remember another time where I read a manga that was trying to do the found footage thing, except for, Goodbye Airy. You know what I mean? So I definitely agree with you, Roll Ray, that there should be more found footage manga. Absolutely.
Yeah, the only one that I know that's like about like filming is a series that is honestly like it's on that level of like Goblin Slayer where it's just like I can't get with the series. Like I
Yeah,
thought the concept was very interesting,
yeah.
but it's just not for me. It's
Blair
a little
Witch
off.
Project. Thank you,
Blair Witch Project,
Ergo.
fantastic.
There we go.
Love that. Um,
Yes.
it's an underrated medium, the found footage thing, and I think it
Yeah.
takes a. I think the reason it's not done in manga very often is that the standardized like tools and framing devices, like the idea that they only, they draw the back row of seats at a schoolroom kind of thing,
Yeah.
doesn't quite fit with that. And there's a lot more effort in choosing what scenes are shown to recreate the found footage effect. And I
Yeah.
think it requires a little more planning than certain mangaka would find valuable.
Right. I mean, like if you're not like, especially if you're like a shonen creator, right? You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
you want your book to be in Weekly Shonen Jump because that's the biggest magazine for comic books in the country. So like naturally you have to kind of like mold whatever you're doing to that established like shonen foundation to a certain degree, and there's not a whole lot of room for the found footage angle for like a whole series, right? So like you kind of have to like relegate it to personal one shot projects like Fujimoto Tatsuki and whatnot. Like
Hmm.
imagine if you know Goodbye Eri was a bigger scale project for Fujimoto Tatsuki. How would that work considering he's operating inside of a shonen publication line? You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
really only works this potently because we know it's short lived and quick and a one shot. You know what I mean? Even though this one is the size of a whole volume, you know what I mean? It is still a one shot. So I feel like what magazine it goes in isn't as thoroughly, you know, assessed and considered as like a long running ongoing series. So you can kind of get away with a little bit more, you know, ideas or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So but yeah, that
Um,
was that was really cool. Chronicle also, tradition says Chronicle is my favorite found footage movie.
hey,
That's another really good one. Pretty sure that was the
that was a
introduction of
creepy.
like Michael B. Jordan as an actor. I'm pretty sure that was like his first like big movie or whatever. I remember that. I saw that shit in theaters. That shit was gas. Absolutely.
Oh man, I Chronicles was like a hidden memory for me. I
Yeah.
remember watching it like multiple times too.
Hmm. Because I remember like
And
the
that
found
that
footage aspect of Chronicle made it
Mhm.
feel like so like believable. You know what I mean? Like as someone who's been reading like, superhero comic books for their entire life and then growing up and realizing once I like reached like teenage life, like, oh, wait a minute, we can't actually have superpowers. That's pretty sad. You know what I mean? And then I started seeing, super powered media through a completely different lens, and then Chronicle comes out and gives it that like ground level, you know
Feels
personal
fresh.
perspective of found footage. And I was like, oh man, this is the closest I've come to like thinking superpowers were real in a really long time, just in the way that it's delivered. You know what I mean? So like that aspect of storytelling, I feel like in the comic book medium could be explored a lot more just because of how much value
Mhm.
it can have in areas that you're not even expecting. So
Uh, there was a lot of things that I've seen. So I studied theater in college. Uh,
mm,
and so like relating to the dad was like, oh yeah, no, I used to do college theater and
yeah,
stuff with some
yeah.
of my friends. And then like, I stopped after a while.
Right.
Um, but there's things that like I learned that kind of like triggered memories when I was reading through the series. Um, there was like 48 and 38 and 40 on the rooftop, and then 54 and 55 during the movie room.
Mm,
The panels, there's not a lot of movement, but there are very small micro expressions. You know, when she's like kind of like considering things or like reading his expression and like reacting to, us, the audience, from Yuta's perspective, the way she like interacts with that
yeah,
made me think of like film. So
yeah.
there's a one of my friends, a guy I was in a frat with, um, he was brought up by the professor for this class called acting for the camera, and
Oh shit.
she whispered something into his ears, and he would look around. He would do this. And then she had us ask, what do you think is going on in his head?
Oh,
And we
cool.
came up with all these different ideas. It's like, oh, he looks a little pensive. He looks thoughtful. He looks disappointed. He looks nostalgic. And then told us, it's like, no, I just asked him to kind of like look to the side, look up, look down, look to the left, look around, and then center back.
Hmm.
That was it.
That was
And it's
literally
like
it.
those little micro expressions can convey so much
Yeah.
without actually having to do things, because it's on us, the audience, to infer emotion, but it takes skill to recognize which micro expressions and pacing and placement can evoke those ideas immediately.
Right.
um, and then I also really like the blur lines, like say like page 56 or
Yeah,
like
I
99.
was just gonna say like we're about to go into the art like section
I feel like I have to.
of the conversation, right? But real quick, I just wanted to shout out V. So rec is Spanish. Okay, I said like European earlier. I said I didn't know
Yeah.
like which like area of Europe the film came out in. I
It's
assumed that it was like Italy or like France or something, but apparently it's Spanish. Thank you, V. That makes a lot of sense actually, because now I'm like remembering scenes where characters are speaking and it's totally Spanish. So thank you for that correction. Um, it didn't
mhm.
even look like it was a correction. I think V was literally just saying "rec" is a good one, the Spanish
Mhm.
one or whatever. But yeah, yeah, that's another like really good found footage movie. But yes, going into the art specifically of Goodbye Airy, you were just about to talk about like 70 like millimeter like frames or whatever, and like motion blur and how it
Oh
captures like
yeah.
the vibe of your phone camera, you know, regaining
Absolutely.
focus or like not having focus for a moment. That was a really good visual detail that I could tell that Fujimoto Tatsuki was like, wait a minute, I can create this aesthetic in my art and have it be a
Yeah.
constant thing throughout the story to remind people that this entire thing is viewed through the lens of a camera phone. And like that was just such a cool thing for me to kind of pick up on inside of Goodbye Aries. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I love that because like specific examples is like 56, 99. You know, it gives the feeling of buffering that cameras do,
Yes,
or the fact
yes.
that like the camera is processing um, a whole whatever scene and converting it into a two-dimensional image, and that causes like the fuzzing up of focus, where it's like the autofocus, like a smartphone struggling with the autofocus feature
Yes.
to like figure out what's in the foreground, what's not. um
Hell yeah.
and then also like there was a level of blurring that I thought was really interesting, because they talk about how it could be the camera, but at the same time, um page 168, I have this bad habit of viewing the problems right in front of me from an outside perspective. Um, I can only face the facts in front of a camera, and so part of me wondered, like, is this like the parts that like blurred were
Yeah.
often things of like high emotional intensity.
Yeah.
So like when the people are ragging on him, or when his father is like revealing things and having that emotional dinner with him,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, is the blur from the camera, or is the blur from Yuta and the fact that he is struggling to kind of exist and cope with that? Is this a level of disassociation? Because there's an element of surrealism throughout the entire series
Yeah.
that is heavily contrasted by the hyperrealism of all the surroundings and art and like architecture and the food and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a
should
really cool point actually. I didn't even like think about it like from that perspective of like is the camera blurring or is this like a metatextual wink to the audience to possibly convey exactly what you're talking about right now about how Yuta isn't able to really focus on the things in front of him because he needs to be behind the camera in order to experience things
Yeah,
because of just how long he's been filming, right? Yeah.
yeah, he reminds me of some kids I knew that were a bit on the spectrum.
Sure.
they preferred things via camera
Yeah.
or through the lens of the thing. They wanted a buffer between them and the world because sometimes the world just comes at you really fast and you couldn't really, you know,
Right.
keep up with it. And
Yeah.
so by like getting really into photography or everything else,
Yeah.
it was a good way for them to enjoy the world they lived in at a pace that they could enjoy.
Absolutely.
Um,
Fuck yeah. Another thing about like Fujimoto Tatsuki's art, like not specifically in Look Back, or I'm sorry, not Look Back, but not specifically in Goodbye Eri, but just like across his works in general. I've talked about it a couple times on YouTube on various channels, but I feel like Fujimoto Tatsuki inside of his character designs, because obviously we know that his landscape work and his background work is very highly detailed and almost photorealistic at times, but his character designs can be very low detail. You know what I mean? Like everyone
mhm.
is very ingloriously depicted. You know what I mean? Like there isn't
Yes.
that like, you know, um there isn't that natural or regular, you know, manga attractiveness that comes with characters. I mean, like after you get used to the manga art style and you come to see these very, bug-eyed, big-haired characters as normal,
Classic
yeah,
styles.
there is like a very, attractive lens that we kind of see these characters through, and that can be done for a multitude of different reasons. Maybe because you want the character design to stick with the audience, or you legitimately want those characters to be attractive in a way that evokes sexual emotions or whatever. Like Fujimoto Tatsuki tends to draw characters in ways that I don't want to say is like very realistic, but like nobody looks ideal. You know what I mean? And when you
Yes.
draw, when you portray characters this ingloriously, it almost kind of takes away that prospect of I'm attached to this character because they're attractive, right? It kind of like takes that away, at least for me, so that when
Mhm.
I look at the character, I go, the only thing that makes me care about this character is their writing, because they do not look very good to me. You know what I mean? It's at least on a character design level, no one looks like strikingly attractive. You know what I mean? I can identify which characters are supposed to be hot. You know what I mean? Like
They
Makima,
or they do,
Retsei,
absolutely.
whoever it may be. Like I can identify that this character is supposed to be beautiful, but by and large, like the character designs just don't jump out at me as like this character is attractive. So I feel like I can
Yeah.
resonate more with their message because I only have an opinion of them through their dialogue and actions, if that makes sense.
I'd say so. I feel like
Yeah.
his style contrasts against idealism. Um, but at the same time, I think that the art style itself, um, kind of digs into like a big theme of the series.
Yeah.
In like, I feel like Fujimoto, by doing this series, is talking about like the documentarian style and
Mm.
the fact that like like it's a manga that like depicts the very flaws of a documentary, right?
Yeah.
So like a document he his mother wanted him to document her, and like if she survived, she was going to be like, yeah, I'm going to turn this, I'm going to flip this around, I'm a TV producer, I have the connections, I'm going to make this glorious, people are going to cry their eyes out, this is going to be on the next like Hallmark movies, this is going to inspire a whole franchise if I'm lucky, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But um the thing about documentaries is it's mostly exposition, and the more you like record someone, more you get to know about them, the
Yes.
more flaws you see in them. And so
Yes.
it's harder to like realistically and honestly portray someone within that, and that's the flaw of documentary styles.
Yeah.
Like we had Tiger King, right? That was huge. People like went ape shit for that. But at the
Dude,
same
Tiger
time,
King was a whole movement when it came out, bro. I swear to God,
it
I
was
couldn't go on
wild.
any social media app without the first thing I see being commentary on Tiger King.
Yeah. And like I watched some of it, and the more I watched, I was like, man, these are just a bunch of really shitty people. Great. Like the one dude that seemed the coolest was like the one that was like, out and out a drug lord, and he's like, yeah, I use my money to create a preservation wildlife, and
Mm.
that's where I keep the animals because no one else will keep them well. And I was like, you have so much blood money on your hands, but you make the most sense in the context of cats. Like, I was like, whew.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that was kind of the big flaw, and then also it goes into the strength of like film, right?
Yeah.
Film doesn't have to be accurate,
Right.
right? Like it doesn't have to be accurate to have those emotional beats, to have emphasis on the parts that should move you. And so it can take liberties and accentuate those moments. And I think that this whole one shot was just a kind of a juxtaposition between uh fantasy and film accentuating what is emotional and needed, where there is like the documentary style and the hyper realism involved with the characters and surroundings, and like what is honesty
Yeah.
and is honesty effective.
Nice. I love that.
um,
Did you have any more comments to make about the art before we move on to characters?
um you know I just like the angles, like
Yeah.
because of the like narrow frames, you only have so much like window room to
Right.
kind of like get a good peek at what's going on. And
Hmm.
by utilizing that, they did things like on like page 118, 124, 125, to kind of show this sort of like candid camera, like from Yuta's perspective, like he's young and he's looking up at his mom and stuff, or like looking down, or like weird angles, and like it helped show off um height, or
Mm,
like
sure.
placement, or
Yeah.
like there was the time when he's getting dressed down by the principal and stuff. And it reminds me of like those TikTok prank videos where they've set the video to the side and you see them having this whole conversation to the side. And it's just like, did he place that camera there, or
Right.
because the principal's like, hey, why are you recording me? So does he have it in his hand, but you don't see it in his hand, you see it on the side?
Yeah.
Is he recording it, or is it more like the emotional distance thing, viewing like the whole scene outside of himself?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and then I liked the wavering voice bubbles to kind of show like the cracking voice moments in,
Yes.
say, like 154, and like quite a few things through like pages 6 through 11, like
You said
the moments.
154?
Yeah, 154,
Oh, yep. Yep.
he has a good moment with that. And
Yeah.
then
And then you said earlier in the story around like the
yeah,
first 10
six
chapters.
through 11, where he's like, it's like, I'm looking at my, it's like he's recording his parents sleeping, and he's like, yeah, I'm recording them, they're asleep. I think I'm gonna do this just in case they die
See,
in the
this
middle of
is
the
what I
night.
mean about like what I was saying like earlier in the segment about like what jumped out at us first is just the atmosphere, right? It's like,
Mhm.
okay, you have this scene where a person is literally filming their parents sleeping, and the first thing you do, maybe some people, the first thing that they do is go, okay, well, this kid is like 12 years old and he's filming everything, and his mom said to film her final days. So, like, it makes sense in that way that he would be filming this thing. Obviously, we need this scene for all of the purposes that it fulfills. But at the same time, in the back of your head, you're like, man, this person is like actually filming people sleeping. Like, what could come from a scene like
Yeah,
this? You know what I mean? And every time I'm turning the page, like I think I'm gonna be like when I'm on this scene, like on page 7, which is literally him filming his parents sleeping, I have to wonder in the back of my head, am I going to turn the page into something grim or dark or whatever? And even though the
I mean,
scene isn't actually trying to portray anything awkward or dark or sinister, that atmosphere just and again, it probably goes back to my history with Fujimoto's work that makes me think that anytime I turn a page, something can be wild, especially if I've lulled myself into a sense of security where I think that it might not. That's where Fujimoto tends to, zag, where I'm expecting him to zig, as I like to say. So it's like,
oh yeah,
yeah, it was just like that was a great page to kind of like point out inside of the art
yeah.
conversation.
It was to me, it screamed the earnestness of a child,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like an adult is putting an adult's responsibility on a child,
Yeah.
and they're giving them instructions, but it's being processed and carried out by a kid. Like, uh, like there's some kids you go like, "Hey, what's up?" and they'll just literally look at the ceiling, like, "Oh, what do you mean, what's up? Oh,
Yeah.
no, the ceiling. There's a fan. What? Did you see something? Is there a
Yeah.
spider? What's going on?"
Yeah.
Like kids, they're
Yeah.
kids.
It's something that I feel like is easy for like some people to kind of not forget but just like miss in a story, right? Because it's like the vehicle of the storytelling is Yuta, who is a 12-year-old child. So like when we are going through the story and things are progressing in ways that are, cohesive and allows us to properly absorb the story that's being told to us, like it might be hard for people to remember that this is a child that is producing all of this. You know what I mean? Like it
Yeah.
could be easy for us to go like, or for us to just maybe forget that they're a child because everything is structured in a way, and delivered in a way that you don't think children can deliver, especially when it comes to a medium like comic books that we know takes like a very big team of people to accomplish. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, when you hone in and you focus on the fact that this is a story being told and what is it trying to convey to us, it's like, oh yeah, this is totally a child. I have to view every single panel through the lens of a child is filming this. You know what I mean? And I had to
Yeah.
constantly remind myself throughout, Goodbye Airy, that I'm supposed to be, filtering this through a child perspective.
They're just entering their teens. Like
Yeah.
Aries' plan takes 2 years. Her whole plan was supposed to take 2 years. So like at the oldest, he's 14. I
Yeah.
mean, not at the end of the series, but like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
at the end of like
Throughout
delivering
the
the
like,
movie.
yeah, I delivered the movie to school. Ari watched it, came and talked to me during my like suicidal like moment, and then now we're creating the new movie. From that point to that point, he's like 12 to 14 years old, and then obviously he's
Yeah.
a full grown adult by the end of the
Life
series.
was
But
really hard. Like, I mean, like, life is always going to be hard no matter who you are. But as an
right,
adult, I have way more tools to cope with that than I did at that age.
yes,
Um, like, man, when I was like 12, I went to a Chinese school,
Hmm.
and there are different aspects of like personal space. Like Americans are known for having a strong desire for personal space,
Hmm.
and some of these kids did not know if Americans peed differently than like Chinese kids, and so some of them, like I'd have like a small crowd of people follow me into the bathroom and try to watch me pee, and I was super stressed out about that. I
Yeah,
didn't have tools to like deal with that.
yeah,
Nowadays, I'm just like
whatever.
someone like someone like kind of bumps into me or like starts like playing with my hair and I'm like, "Excuse me, could you just fuck right off?" Cool, love that for you. And like as a child, I was just like, "I'm calling in sick. I'm out.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
making up any excuse I can to just leave.
right.
Toodles."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, uh,
Hell yeah, man.
and yeah, the warbling voice really got to me, like
Yeah.
because he just like released the movie and he's like recording a cat and then she starts talking to him. He's like, he has that like like you could imagine him having like this croak in his voice, responding because he's emotional, right?
Yes,
Like
yes.
he's like he's hit the point of having to relive the death of a loved one, but also like this weird feel like as sorrowful as that he has this like surge of vindication and like the potential of catharsis and like resolution from like a trauma that was enough to drive him to death.
Yeah.
Like who wouldn't be emotional? And I loved that the paneling kind of like the bubbles kind of like helped
Yeah.
emphasize that.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
scene too, like, man, I'm trying to remember like where it is. I'm like so mad that I didn't put it down. Actually, I could save it for like when we actually get to the scenes conversation. So I'll hold it off for that. But do you want to like get into like the characters of this story? Like do you want to like specifically like talk about like Yuta, Eri, the mom and the dad and
Yeah,
whatnot? Because I feel like
I'd be
that's where
down.
we're at next. Okay. So like the dad specifically, I kind of like, obviously, like, Yuta's the main character, Eri is the secondary main character, and then you have the mom and the dad kind of in the background, and then you have like that random like best friend of Eri like later on in the end of the series or
Hmm.
whatever. But
A
really, the
hair bit.
core cast is these four characters, and the dad specifically is one that kind of spoke to me because it wasn't until I went back through it a second time that I noticed things about the dad's mannerisms and facial expressions that could hint towards that twisty kind of situation that we get later when we find out that the mom is actually a terrible person, right?
That
So
things weren't all right. Like
yeah,
his micro expressions added to that level of unease.
right,
You're like, I can't tell if he's like super taken aback or like super worried, but like the first 3 pages where he's like shocked and he's like,
yeah,
how do I respond to this?
right,
You know what? I'm just gonna swallow it and like let's go along with this. I don't know.
yeah,
You know, he has that vibe and it definitely I
yeah.
think
Because like if
that
you go into the first couple of pages of the one shot, it's them sitting at a table saying happy birthday to Yuta, got his cake there, and then the mom, on page two is like, you know how I could die from my illness? Like, how does that make you feel? And they have a conversation about how that makes them feel. It's like, I don't want to talk about that on my birthday, yada yada. But she's like, hey, on video, you can hear my voice and you can see me move. That way, even if I'm gone, you can still remember me. Can you do that for me? And the dad's, you know, expressions throughout this opening scene tell you a lot about the twist that is coming later on, about halfway, a little bit over halfway in the one shot, when you find out exactly what kind of person the mom is. I feel like
Mhm.
retrospectively, you go back through it a second time and really pay attention to the father in these scenes, and you can see that he has an issue with this mother. You know what I mean? At first, when you're going through it, you can make a lot of assumptions about the dad. You know what I mean? Like maybe the dad is sad because he's a fucking salary man with a dead end job, and
Yeah.
yada yada yada. Like he seems like very uninterested, not really there, clearly thinking about other things. His expressions are very like distant, and very
Yeah.
not associative, you know what I mean, with what's going on. At least to me, when I was like kind of like going through it the first time before I got all of the beats and all of the twists and whatnot, I remember thinking about this dad like, damn, this dad looks depressed. He doesn't have a single word of input in this entire first scene while the mom
Mm.
is saying all of these things. Why would the
Yeah.
dad not have anything to say during this
Is his
scene?
head hanging
Yeah.
because he doesn't feel good about the situation,
Because he
knowing that
knows what kind of person the fucking mom is. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So he's like,
he
bitch. Yeah, he's like, man,
he
hold on,
turns
man. Yeah.
he turns and then he's surprised that his son is willing to do that.
Hmm.
And then once he hears that his son is willing to it, you can kind of see him like try to like fortify himself, stiff upper lip kind of thing, where he's
Yeah.
looking upwards. He's like, you know what? I'm gonna support my son. I want him to at least have this. This is a bad time for everyone. Like he's not having a good time. Like he's depressed, obviously. His partner is dying. Like or potentially going to die for sure. Like he
Right.
doesn't know that uncertainty.
Yeah.
That uncertainty eats at
I didn't
people.
even think about that. Like you could totally tie it to the idea that he knows that his wife is on borrowed time and maybe that's why he's sad. You know what I mean? Like you never really
Mhm.
think about it until you finish the series, get all the character arcs, get all the major plot moments and beats, and then go back through it a second time and go, okay, why are these characters behaving the way they are throughout the entire series until these twists are made apparent. You know what I mean? And it's like going back and seeing the dad in these earlier scenes. Fujimoto is literally telling us through the art what kind of person this character is and why they are responding and reacting the way they are to this information. And you couldn't possibly have known the reasons unless you read the whole thing. But there are a lot of inferences and assumptions that you can make in the meantime. And I feel like Fujimoto plays into that in his storytelling. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's man, no.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the weird part about this series is that there are only 3 people with names in this series. Period. Only one of them has a last name. Like Yuta Ito. That is it. That
Yeah.
is the one character, the full name. This is the main protagonist.
Yeah.
Eri is the eponymous character. She's there. No one else knows her last name. And then there's Tauchi, not Taguchi, the nurse. And
Yeah.
she's in there for 5 seconds. It's like, this is Taguchi. She gets along with my mom. It's Tauchi. Yeah, moving on. I'm a kid.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
everyone else, like, not even his parents have their names. They're always referencing your dad, your mom, my dad, my mom, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to have that in there because
Yeah.
like if you think about the like credits of a movie, it makes sense, and then you'd
Right.
be like, oh hey, yeah, no, this is Juggler A, and this is Guardsman B, and this is Little Girl 1, 2, and 3, and this is
Juggler A.
yeah, right, exactly, like uh
It just reminds me of all the times I've like finished a movie and then like, the immersion shatters and you're looking at the names of the actors that play all the roles and then you get that Gangster 1. You know
Gangster
what I mean?
One,
Taxi
Thick
Driver
Necked
2.
Lad,
Yeah, yeah.
the Rat Pack,
Yeah.
Pack of Shitty Kids. There's like I love some of the British credits sometimes for like British movies because they'll just be like, yeah, Shifty Kids, boom, and I'm just like,
Yes.
all right, that works. Love
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Um, shoot.
How do we feel about Yuta specifically as like a man? I know that I like jumped straight to the dad just because like I wanted to make a comment about how like the dad doesn't make sense unless you like for real unless you've read it like at least 2 times. But like Yuta is someone that you can analyze and dissect like pretty thoroughly on your first way through because obviously he is the focus and he's who we experience the story through. So big cheers. Oh shit. I don't even know exactly how the cheer stuff works yet. Oh, okay. I think it's cheers attached to a comment. So, all right, here we go. Jomo666. Thanks for the cheer, buddy. Damn, got in a bit late because my wife wanted me to sit on her face. This is some good stuff. I love the story so much. Thank you, Jomo. It's good to see you, brother. The situation with your wife sounds like a great problem to have, so I won't say, sorry about that or anything, but thanks for pulling up, cheering, and leaving a very funny comment, man. It's good to see you,
Hey,
bro.
as long as you don't have your kid film those final moments, you're good.
Yeah, and while we're here, you know what I mean. Like a couple of people have followed since we started the stream. Una S2E just followed a moment ago. Thank you for the follow. Welcome to the stream. Glad to have you here. 42 minutes
Oh,
ago, Pandagram666 has followed. Thank you very much for that. And then, of course, the tradition gift subs and things like that. Everybody who's pulling up and watching us right now
thank you so
and
much.
following and subscribing, you're all champions. We love you. But yeah, Mello, sorry to cut you off.
No worries,
How
no
do we feel
worries.
about Yuta, man, as a character, as a main character for
Uh,
this kind of story?
he is like he's a strong everyman. I mean, it's really hard for me to not relate to him in that sense that like I have gone through a similar experience, just minus the whole recording thing. Um, and then also just like growing up, not getting a lot of praise from my environment, the people that did praise me or like said, hey, you know what? You have value. You are valuable, regardless of what you do for or don't do for people. Those are the people that I was like, yes, you're my friend. I'm fucking with you. You're going to take great care of me and I'll take great care of you if I can.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. So like for me, Yuta was an extremely relatable character.
Hmm.
He was made, I think, a little bland on purpose because he is the vehicle for the audience.
Yeah.
He has like a few like kind of like minor quirks, but it's just like nothing that's outside the realm of like the regular manga enthusiast,
Yes.
consumer of the media.
Yeah.
Oh, Yuta, you like movies and you view things with a pinch of fantasy. Oh man, over imaginative daydreamer? Yeah, that doesn't describe the entire manga reading demographic. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then also like, it's like looking at the like number 69. Nice. It's like every time you see nipples, you go, ah yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, you're 14 years old. A 14-year-old boy, sure. You know what? I
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah. I
I
appreciate
think
you to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. I didn't. Yeah.
I think the nuance from him comes from his product.
Yeah.
It doesn't come from him. I mean, it does come from him, but like
Yeah.
not through his words,
Right.
but through his
Well,
actions.
that's what I was going to say. I'm glad that you brought up like the nuance of his character because like at face value, this is like, a very cookie cutter easy character to kind of follow. He's young. We all know whether we're of his age when we read this story, or whether we're a little bit older as we read this story, it doesn't really matter. We either can relate to the fact that we've been there at that age or we are there at that age. You know what I mean? So it's very easy for us to relate to a kid, especially one that is portrayed in such an organic and understandable and relatable way. It feels like it's just like boom, set it and forget it main character. That's the vehicle for the story. It's good enough, but then as you go through the story and by the end of it, his dimensionality or his dimensions kind of like come out. Like he's a very multiple dimension character by the end because we can tell we understand his motivations. We understand all of the things that happened in his life that led him to make the decisions that he does throughout the story of the one shot and whatnot. I feel like by the end of the story we can understand or relay a lot of the information that Fujimoto Tatsuki was going for inside of the character of Yuta as far as like what his purpose and his presence actually means in the story because of how well the character is fleshed out in really unorthodox means, right? It's like I don't remember a time where I read a manga that was filmed quote unquote in this way, which obviously creates like a window, you know what I mean, to the mind and motivations and, just overall, vibe of this character. You know what I mean? Because we know that it's through the lens of his camera phone and things like that. You know what I mean? As far as why Yuta does the things that he does, we have a pretty good idea of that by the end of the story. As far as what his goals are, that's obviously established in multiple points and gone through, a couple different times throughout the story. So by the end, something that started out as very cookie cutter, very standard, very, you don't really need to know too much more about this character to understand what they're trying to do. Extra dimensional factors come in towards the end that let us go, oh no, this is actually a very fleshed out character and we know pretty much everything about him. So I appreciate Yuta for that.
I think Yuta's like extreme like the really deep nuance of his character is like framed throughout the whole series because like you have to watch. Yeah, I mean you have to. I mean it's so much like a movie. I say watch instead of read.
Right,
Um,
right.
uh,
That's good.
going through the one shot multiple times, you get to see the picture that Yuta was from a very demanding, like strict family. It wasn't healthy. Like she struck him, like physically struck him. And never like there was this one moment where he says, and I don't remember her ever praising me. Um,
Yeah, dude, that was deep. That was heavy,
that
man.
hurt. That sucks.
Yeah.
Um, but then like it's a story about a young man who has, not the greatest foundation, still has like a large, traumatic event of a parent dying, and then trying to find a reason to live, having that reason mocked into the dirt, and then grasping onto the first thing that offers him another reason to live. And he does
Yes.
so. And he holds on to that after it served its purpose, right? Like after it redeemed him in the eyes of his peers, he held on to that thing for years and years and years. Lived his whole life, still held on to that reason to live. And then he suffered enough tragedy where he's like, I can't even use this as a reason to keep going.
Yes.
And that's Yuta at his core, is a young man desperate for a reason to not give up. Like a person that is studious and is willing to endure a lot of things for the sake of a goal and has a hard time both giving up and not giving up.
Yes. Very well
Yeah.
said.
And that's Yuta in a
Yeah,
nutshell,
I,
I
lo-
think.
I love that breakdown. That was nice. Absolutely. How do we feel about Aerie? Eri, okay,
Aerie?
Eri, I feel
Ooh.
like
What do you think
is
about Aerie? You go
yeah. I was
first.
just gonna say like I asked you and then I'm like, well, let me answer. No, okay. So like so like Eri, I don't know, man. Eri is like that archetype. Like and when it comes to characters inside of Fujimoto Tatsuki's work, I feel like he goes out of his way to introduce characters in a way that seems, you know, like you can recognize it, you know what I mean? Like he definitely uses the archetypes of certain characters to give you something relatable and memorable and obvious, and then obviously takes that and molds it in ways that are completely almost entirely unrecognizable from the initial archetype that they were introduced as by the end of their character arc. And I feel like Eri represents a situation where it's like I feel like I've seen the silhouette of Eri's character in a lot of different series. You know what I mean? Like the fucking I don't want to say like emo, but just like that like unorthodox girl in a school setting that comes to you
Mhm.
and lets them know I'm not like the rest of the girls that go here and here's why. You know what I mean? Like I'm trying to think of like
Not
examples.
necessarily a pick me, but like counterculture almost.
Yeah, yeah, you know what I mean? Like anti-establishment, very like like a little bit deeper than you think, you know, a 12-year-old or 13-year-old girl would be. You know what I mean? I'm
Chomo
trying
says
so
the Ramona
hard.
Flowers archetype.
What is it? The Ramona Flowers are? I don't know what that. I'm sorry. I don't know what that is
That's from
actually.
Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Oh my God. If Kichi is in here right now, he is going to cuss me out for not reading Scott Pilgrim yet. Hopefully
Well,
he's
if you
not
need
here.
a light palate cleanser that does still have a deep hits of sadness,
Yeah.
you can go with Scott Pilgrim,
Yeah.
where it's that one's more like a 500 Days of Summer, where with the reread you realize that the guy is probably the villain
Yeah.
um, of the series.
But it's just that like edgy, you know, love interest like character type. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's like, hey, everybody else is kind of like carbon copy clones. You can't pick them out in a crowd, but I'm the one that says like, yo, you don't have to listen to everything your parent says. Like you can watch a
Mhm.
R-rated movie in Discord with us over here and not tell your parents. Like kind of girl, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
anti-establishment, against the grain, thinks a little bit deeper than your average person of their silhouette. You know what I mean? And like that is kind of like what Eri is introduced as. And Fujimoto leans into that heavily in her character as far as actually zoning in on Eri and like giving us information about her character that allows us to understand her on a deeper level. Like she's a film nut, you know what I mean? Like she sits here and watches movies all day and dissects them on the level of a professional film critic. You know what I mean? Like that's not something that you expect from a 12 or 13 or 14-year-old girl. You know what I mean? Or just person in general of that age. You know what I mean? But there are people out there that definitely exist inside of that area. You know what I mean? Like you never know. Like
Yeah.
you know how mature a small child like really is until you know get to see them through a lens like we're focusing on them in a comic book or something, you know what I mean? So but at face
Yeah.
value you kind of just assume that kids are at a certain level of intelligence at certain ages until you hone in on them and find out how deep and intelligent they can actually be at that age. So I feel like Eri represents that kind of situation inside of Goodbye Eri. And that's just like really cool to me. Is that like, yo, you assumed a whole bunch about like this age group, but guess what? They can totally talk about things on the level of adults. You know what I mean? So
Oh, yeah, no, kids grow up fast. They don't have to, but they can definitely be forced to. Um, Aerie seems like she's that archetype of precocious young woman who understands how she can be valued by the world and like understands the value of the things that she's interested in.
but she isn't
Like
going
is
out of her way to tell the world this is who I am. It's just if you so happen
yeah.
to be the kind of person that she is attracted to for one reason or another and is willing to open herself up to, then you learn those things. It's not like,
Yeah.
hey, everyone, look at me. I'm different than you. It's, oh, you have chosen to kind of like see me for who I really am, or I have chosen to show you the real me. Well,
Me
like this is
vibe?
how deep I can be. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, exactly. she seems like a young, precocious person that sort of. Oh, don't want to jump ahead of the situation, but could you consider the possibility of what you interview?
Are you calling out a chatter right now? Is this?
I'm just quick reading the
Oh,
chat a
okay,
little bit.
yeah. So Jomo 666. Well, don't want to jump ahead of the situation, but will you consider the possibility of what Fujimoto revealed near the end of the story? What do you mean by that,
Oh, I think
Jomo?
it's about her being a vampire.
Oh,
Like
sure.
the idea
Yeah.
that like she's mature because she
Oh,
lived a full adult life at least twice
could you
over,
could you run
according to
that
her.
back? Your internet kind of like dropped out for a
Oh yeah,
second
no
and cut you
worries,
off.
no
Yeah.
worries. So like her maturity is more of I've lived for 200 years of pop. Each incarnation is like 200 years worth of memories.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty mature for my age, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a part of me that like I want to dissect Eri as a schoolgirl, like a regular schoolgirl, and I want to dissect Eri as a vampire because this series she mentions it early in the one shot.
Yeah.
She's like, this part of the movie, I liked how I couldn't tell what was fiction and
Yeah.
what was real. She called it an interesting puzzle, and
Yes.
that was, I think, driven throughout the entire series, and like integral to her interpretation of her character. So yeah, just a very precocious young girl. She is dying of something, right? She is terminal. She's got a chronic illness, and it's killing her. And
Yeah.
so she probably wants to fill her life with good memories.
Yeah.
So she watches a bunch of movies, and
Yeah.
she has taste, and she sees Yuta's stuff. And it's like, you know what? You're my age. You have potential. You're about to die.
Yeah. And
I'm old.
also
I'm a
like
dead man walking.
yeah, and also like well, obviously she like doesn't reveal that right away. She kind of like frames it in a very subtextual kind of like, hey, like I see you over here about to jump off of this balcony. Like I see the potential in your work. I want to like, help you achieve that potential with my history of film analysis and whatnot or whatever.
Hmm.
But like at the same time though, it's like the whole reason that she probably approached him is because she resonated with the idea of terminal illness inside of the film when it comes
Yeah.
to Yuta's mother. So like I'm trying to like, map out all of the motivations and the reason why characters do things so that I can add
Mhm.
dimensionality to them. And when it comes to Eri, it's like I feel like 100% like you are on this roof right now talking to Yuta and explaining the things that you are explaining to him and wanting to offer your friendship to him because you know that you're on borrowed time just like his mom was. You know what I mean? Like I feel like that is the catalyzing
Yeah.
factor that warranted the meetup in the first place and I really like that on like a retrospective kind of situation
Hmm.
when I think back on the
She
series.
she is to the mother.
What'd you
I think
say? Hold on.
she's a good
Say that again.
she's a good parallel and analog to the mother
Okay.
in the fact that they both have the same goal, right? They want to be preserved. They want um, him to present to the world a vision of them because they know that they can't live past a certain time and present themselves to the world as living human beings, right? And so they both have the same thing they want, but they have different approaches from it, right? So like
Yeah.
the mother was like really harsh, whereas Eri was like firm but fair.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like she
Yes.
wasn't she didn't mince her words very much, and she was kind of a dickhead, like very brusque. Her own friend said that she was kind of a bitch. Um, but like at the same time, she was just like she'd be like, "Oh, this is average. This is boring. I understand this thing. I see where you're coming from." And that, but she would praise him on things.
Oh.
She would. I don't feel this, but I see where you're coming from. Have you considered these options? Right? Like she gave him constructive criticism
Yeah, for
as
sure.
opposed to why are you why are you filming cats, delete that, that's useless, do you want to make me look ugly, no, get rid of this,
Yeah. Yeah.
and like whereas like she was just like no, hey, um let's do this, let's
Yeah.
do that.
And I feel like
So
this is
like
like
as a
actually. Oh,
human,
sorry. Keep going. Keep going.
so as a human, I feel like that's her main motivation, and you can
Yeah.
definitely see that she's not like a perfect person despite like the idealization through the series that we perceive as part of the audience of the film. Because she said like, if you're gonna kill yourself, if you really want to kill yourself, do it at the other hospital. Their tickets, I hate them. Also, do you want to like give me the money in your wallet? Because
Yeah.
like you're not gonna be using it, and I don't want to pick it off a corpse.
Right. Right.
Like
Right. Right.
there's a cutthroat part to her,
Yeah.
and a petty one too.
Right.
So you can see that part.
And you said you
Um,
wanted to kind of like focus on her as a human and then her as a vampire or whatever. Like, what's your vampire stuff?
I think that living an extremely long life is a
Yeah.
bit of a curse.
Right.
Like we've touched it a lot of it, like undead and luck with Andy, and like the idea, like yeah, no, the people that you love, if you outlive them, it's gonna be hard. Yuta's biggest struggle was outliving death,
Yeah.
right? Like all the deaths and lives and personal connections that he had in his life, that was what broke him. And so I think about like a vampire, you know, that's the kind of stuff that breaks them
Right.
on a grander scale.
Yeah.
Uh, and the idea that, like, yeah, you have to slowly die every 200 years.
Yeah.
That's
Either.
awful.
Yeah, and V made a great comment, so I just wanted to point it out. Aries' maturity is super interesting as far as she's presented as the quote unquote Ramona's flowers, when in reality she's actually a flawed character, and we don't see that real side due to the nature of the scope being the film. And that's a beautiful comment, and I feel like I 100% agree with it. And as far as like the maturity aspect of things go, I can't help but think that like Fujimoto used the idea of Eri being a vampire to kind of layer the idea of maturity in such a young body to the audience, right? Because it's like this chick is 12 years old, 13, 14, whatever the fuck it is, but
She went to
she's,
his school.
yeah,
Like,
she went to his school, so like we know that they're relative age, but at the same time, she's like analyzing film on like a very high level. You know what I mean? Like we would not expect, a 12, 13, 14-year old to be able to dissect films in the scenes that we get of them dissecting films. We wouldn't expect, to get such a deep understanding of
yeah.
the craft from such a young body. And that can be used, or that can be explained by the idea that she is a vampire that's lived for however
Hmm.
many hundreds of years or whatever. So that's a cool angle too that I feel like Fujimoto took in the character arc of Eri.
Yeah. Because, like, if you view her as a child, she's a prodigy. If you view her as a vampire, she is a well curated enthusiast.
Yes.
And it's just like an epicure, right?
Right.
Um, so her character is very valuable in the fact that like she can be awful.
Yeah.
She can be mean, and she kind of bullies him a little bit like, hey man, you should be grateful that a babe like me wants to like spend any time with you. Excuse
Hmm.
me, let's go
Hmm.
watch movies. This is
Hmm.
for your project. She's a taskmaster. She's very driven.
Yeah.
Like he's a kid, right? He's like, we're even doing this on the days we don't have school, and she's like, duh. Like,
Yeah.
A, I'm living on borrowed time. You don't know that. And B, you're a kid. You're going to get distracted and maybe never focus on this again.
Right. Exactly.
you know, so I think that she is kind of like a brighter mirror
Yeah.
to the mother.
Yeah. I like
Yeah.
that. I like that a lot. And like while we're on the subject of like Eri as a human versus Eri as a vampire, regardless of how you really want to kind of like view this situation, whether you like totally buy into the vampire aspect or whatever, I feel like one thing that absolutely grounds Eri to the human experience and relatability factor of a character like Eri is when we get the information that she is on borrowed time, that she's just about done with all of her living, and so she tasks Yuta with filming her in the same way that he did his mother towards the end of her life and whatnot. And in those scenes where there's no dialogue and it's just raw pictures of Yuta, you know snapshotting Aerie at specific locations like an ice cream parlor or a park or yada yada. It's those moments that really ground us back to the idea that this is a human being. You know what I mean? And vampires can like ice cream too or whatever. But the point that I'm making is that, like, hey, like, no matter how you're perceiving the situation, everyone can relate to a walk at the park, a stop at an ice cream parlor, a fucking, you know, like whatever the scenes kind of like show us about like regular day-to-day life for average people. Aerie is still, you know, indulging in those things despite being a vampire or whatever. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So like that's just really
Um,
cool that we get that kind of situation inside of her character.
I think it's important because as a vampire, she's not like consigned to not living. You know what I mean? Like she's still living.
Right.
She's still enjoying things,
Yeah, for
even though
sure.
she can't have like too many peers.
Yeah, and
You
we've
know.
seen, you know, like we've seen stories that focus on immortality. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
one that comes to mind is like UQ Holder by Ken Akamatsu, the sequel to Maho Sensei Negima, where the power system or the job, you know, inside of the story, similar to Shinobi in Naruto or Pirates in One Piece, the job or the power system is immortality and the different forms that that can come in. You have
Mhm.
characters that are immortal because they're vampires. You have characters that are immortal because they're like cyborgs and they put their consciousness in a robot body. It explores different kinds of immortality from character to character, but the overarching theme of that is we've lived too long. We don't see the world the same way as non-immortal people do. Everything is boring to us. We watch all of our loved ones die, so like why care about anything and why do anything normally when nothing fucking matters because we'll live through anything that happens to us. You know what I mean? So to see a character that has lived a ridiculous amount of time like a vampire inside of Aerie, to then have her be shown in such relatable scenes like going to a fucking burger joint or going to an aquarium or something like that. It's just like, okay, so even though you have lived a ridiculous amount of time, you can still tie yourself to regular human, non immortal activities. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
like, that says a lot too.
I think it's really boring for immortals and vampires to live outside the spectrum of humanity, right? Like, oh yeah, like I read Preacher, the comic Preacher, right? And
Hey,
like
yo, read
Cass
Preacher. Read Preacher. If
yeah,
you're gonna read a Garth
Cassidy,
Ennis, if you're gonna read a Garth Ennis book, read Preacher. The Boys,
very good.
watch it on TV. Fuck that
Yeah.
book. But read Preacher if you're gonna do Garth Ennis. Anyway,
Yeah.
keep going.
But Cassidy is like Aerie, right? Like
Yeah.
they want to live the life and they want to be remembered and they want to be cared for and they want to continue to be cared for. Whereas like the other vampires that he ran into were all stuck on the idea that they are
Oh,
above
shit.
humanity, that they are removed from humanity, a very specific lifestyle without humanity,
Yeah.
despite being literal parasites having to feed off humans.
Right.
Um, but they're selling the lie, you know.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate the vampire that is Aerie.
Hell yeah. Love that. Well, the last character in the characters section is the mom, but I feel like we have been on characters for a while and we could probably
Mhm.
segue into another segment. Luckily, my thoughts in a different segment cater to the character of the mom, so we can kind of just like throw
Mhm.
her into this next area of discussion, which is major plot points, right? So finding out the mom sucks was fucking crazy, right? Like in the beginning of the story, you know, when she tells Yuta about how recording her last days will allow him to you know, remember her better or whatever it was, like that totally makes sense at the time. You know what I mean? And it evokes very relatable emotions. You know what I mean? So Fujimoto later tying that back to very vain, you know, or narcissistic character traits works so well as like a twisty subversion, because like the line of dialogue works perfect through both lenses. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Fujimoto just knew that the audience would assume that the mom was cool because I don't know.
We have no reason not
There's
to
really
believe
no,
that.
yeah, exactly. Like there's no reason not to. So he leans into that, quote unquote obviousness of the situation. So I feel like the best subversions, or twists or whatever, come from playing into the comfortability of certain tropes or situations. When we're positive that a situation is a certain way, that's when you drop those bombs, right? Because we would never assume that there was some shady, beneath the surface shit going on with the mom. It's like we're unconsciously positive that this kind of situation isn't possible. So we don't even think about it, of course, until Fujimoto decides to tell us that that's the situation. You know what I mean? So that's why
Yeah.
that twist works so well, because it works no matter which way you view the mom, whether you're a first time
Mm.
reader that sees the mom essentially as our own mothers. You know what I mean? Like, what would we do in this situation? Like, I could see my mom saying, like, the same kind of situation if she had a terminal illness. You know what I mean? I could see. I mean, like, my mom probably wouldn't want me to film her last days, but like, if my mom was dying and said, like, yo, son, like, I don't want you to become 30 years old and forget my face and forget my voice. So film me until I die so
Let's
that
go
you
on
can have,
vacation.
yeah, so that you can have a record of who I am as a person so that you don't have to worry about that kind of situation of, oh my God, I don't even remember my mom barely. You know what I mean? Because Yuta is 12 years old. So
Hmm.
like, even though he's like developed enough to be his own person, by the time he's 35, 40 years old, if his mom died at 12, how much would he remember of her outside of pictures and videos? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So assuming before you get the twist that the mom sucks, the line of dialogue of like, I'm dying, film me so that you can better remember me, yada yada, it fits, for a
A
mom that's,
regular
yeah,
type.
a regular mom. It fits for a mom that's cool. You go back through it a second time after finding out that the mom sucks, and it's like,
It feels like a
okay, the
pitch.
line of dialogue makes just as much sense for a narcissistic character.
It feels sinister
Yeah,
because it
or a
feels
vain
like
character.
you're
Yeah.
framing it in that way so that your child will agree to the idea,
Yes.
not knowing what you're gonna put them through later. Um,
Yes.
but at the same time, like the whole idea of like we have no reason to do it, like the initial optimism,
Yes.
because if you have initial cynicism, like deep cynicism to every little like unobtrusive thing, that's called paranoia, bro. Like
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
know, take the meds for that. Like go talk to a doctor, please.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
uh, but like yeah, no, she was cruel.
Yeah, that
She
was
was
just like
cruel.
the one that I wanted to focus on because of like as like a major plot point. I feel like finding out that the mom sucks is the beat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That like the entire like first half of the storytelling kind of hinges on. You know what I mean? It's like we're supposed to read throughout this entire thing feeling bad and sympathetic for Yuta because his mom is literally dying, but then we find out that the mom was actually a terrible fucking person. So it
Hmm.
completely changes our way that we view the beginning of the story up until that information. So like that was the major plot point that I wanted to focus on because it is
Oh,
the most subversive easily out of the entire situation for me.
one thing to touch on the parents.
Yeah.
Um, there is definitely a massive power dynamic between the father and the mother, and that the father only did theater right out of college,
Yeah.
gave up when he wasn't successful immediately.
Yeah.
His mother was an active TV producer,
Yeah.
and so she's the main breadwinner. TV production makes a ton of money.
Hold on.
It also requires a very
Say
cut.
that last part over again. Your internet is like
Oh,
going to shit right now. Yeah.
oh, I apologize.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I just want to make sure that your words are properly
Oh,
portrayed.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So, like, as a TV producer, you make bankroll, but it also requires a very cutthroat mentality, especially in the entertainment industry. But the power dynamic is like the mother was like the main breadwinner because of her job, and between like their shared interest in theater, she lapped the father, right?
yes,
So
yes.
if they ever got into an argument about like whether it's right or wrong for you to do
This is
that,
an incredible point. The mom can just go, "What do you know, dad? I'm actually
yeah,
the accomplished film person in the household, and you just had this as like a fleeting passion goal when you were in fucking college. So
you were a
yeah,
hobbyist.
you listen to me when it comes to things related to film." And he's just very docile and very, submissive in that way
Yeah,
because he
he's
understands his like place on the totem pole almost. Yeah.
He's been browbeaten for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
He's not, but at the same time, like people will stay in abusive relationships or not great relationships for a lot of reasons, like they want to believe in the person that they first met, right?
Yes.
Something as simple as that.
Yes.
um, or they don't want to accept that those people have changed before their very eyes without them noticing,
Yes.
that kind of thing. And
Absolutely.
then like also the like if maybe not to borrow it, maybe it is a phase of mom
Sorry, you got
and
to you
like
got to you got to start that one
oh
over too
sorry.
because your internet dropped out yet
Oh,
again.
so they're talking about like it might just be a phase of change, right?
Yeah.
And that they might change for the better, and that this is just happens to be a low point.
Mm.
There's a lot of reasons for people doing what they do. Um, but yeah, no, huge power dynamic shift in that.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah,
just wanted to
I
touch
like
on
how
that.
you brought that up because I definitely didn't think about like the power dynamic between the mother and the father. And as a father myself, this is something that isn't really a thing in my household directly as it is in Goodbye Airy. But like there is like a level of like, okay, I have my idea of what it means to raise a child, and the mother has an idea of what it means to raise the child, and like we kind of butt heads when it comes to that aspect. You know what I mean? So to see that like through the lens of we're both aspiring film people, the whole story is kind of centered around the idea that Yuta is filming something. So naturally, the power dynamic inside of raising this child is represented in the form of I was a successful film person, you were an aspiring film person. What does that difference mean in regard to raising our child? And that's something that isn't really blatantly put in the face of the audience. You know what I mean? But now that you've kind of like broken it down in the way that you have, it's giving me like an entirely different view on the family dynamic. So I appreciate the shit out of that.
I do what I can.
Hell yeah, man.
Uh,
Hell yeah. Did you have like a major plot point that you wanted to like focus on as far as like a specific beat in the story or anything like that?
oh
Yeah,
man.
there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them, but I was wondering if there was like anything that kind of like jumped out at you as like I definitely need to talk about this shift in the narrative.
There was the scene where he pitched Ari the I want to make this movie. It's going to be semi-autobiographical. Like he ran out of ideas, right? Like
Yeah.
he's like I'm not good at ideas, but I still he regretted his first attempt being a failure. And so this is his attempt of salvaging the first goal of his life, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so he pitches it on like page 86, 87. Let me just quick jump to that.
86, 87.
Yeah, where uh he's going over like the whole thing, and he's like they shoot the movie, the protagonist and the vampire fall in love, the vampire is growing weaker and weaker. Finally, I film the vampire's death and their love story's over. Having filmed a death, the thing he couldn't do for his mother, the protagonist regains the will to live and the confidence to make movies. The end. And watching her face, like she's stone cold impassive because knowing what we know from the series, he's called her out dead to rights. The
Yes.
fact, maybe not like the love part, but like I think that there could be still like a deep affection for or and respect for one's abilities
Mm-hmm.
there, but the
Yeah.
whole growing weaker and weaker, vampire's death,
Yes.
um, and like watching her listen on his eyes and like do
Hold
a
on.
little bit of soul
Watching
searching.
her listen. What?
Watching her listen on 86, and then on the next page, the first two panels,
Are just
she's got her
her
eyes
reacting.
closed,
Yeah. Just like thinking about what she just said.
taking stock of everything. Like
Yeah.
instead of like emotionally reacting to
Right.
that, she
Right.
takes a moment to like really digest something that hits way too close to home
Yeah.
than she was ever prepared to like realize.
Yeah.
And she's just like, don't lash out.
Yeah.
Don't lash out.
Don't let it be obvious
That
that this is
actually
like,
has a good idea.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and it is. It's a great idea. But it hit way too close for home for her because she was like stone
Yes.
cold.
Yeah,
Like,
and I forgot that this is Yuta kind of like pitching. Like I'm going back through it and looking at it right now, and this is literally the pitch of the idea of the movie that
mhm.
he came up with. And yeah, yeah, you're totally right. You go into 87, and she just kind of sits there for two panels. You know what I mean? And we don't know how much time passes, right? Because like this is what we talk about inside of like what comic books do that other mediums can't. And specifically inside of comic books, this is something that cannot be ignored or denied, is that time moves according to moments instead of seconds. When we're watching a TV show, we are at the mercy of the runtime of the TV show or the
Mhm.
anime or whatever other live action or animated medium, that we're kind of experiencing at the time. Time moves in seconds. You know what I mean? So the dramatic breaks, the moments like these on page 87 where it's two panels of just raw reaction where you have different light sources, like hitting the face of the character to portray different times in the show or movie that they're watching. And
Mhm.
that's literally like the only difference in the art is the light source. We have no idea how much time has passed in those first two panels of page 87. We have to fill in that
But
gap ourselves. You know what I
but
mean?
it is 50%
Of
of the
that page.
page,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
that means a lot.
Yes.
And so,
Because
man,
it's cool
and
because like as consumers of this medium, we're like a secret third collaborator in the project, right? Because like where normally a film or a TV show will fill in the moments in between panels for us because time moves in seconds and we see everything happen in real time or whatever in the movie, inside of a comic book, we have to decide how much time has passed from panel to panel. We have to give a voice to the dialogue, etc., etc. We have to decide like what movements the body made in action scenes from panel to panel. We are the secret hidden third collaborator in this work because we have to do
yeah,
so much with our imagination, whereas other mediums will just give that information to us because of the medium it's existing inside of. So
it requires a lot of interpretation. And I also like that that was the first point where I was like, huh, that's strange. Like her reaction made me strange. And then when I got the like to the end the first time, I was like, motherfucker, that's that was it. That was the first hint. But it wasn't actually. Page 62, when they order all that food and he's like, we're gonna eat all that, and she responds, I'm not gonna gain weight anyway. So
yeah.
her body remains the same. She's like, it
Yo.
doesn't matter what I eat, I am going to remain the same.
I love that. Oh my god. On page 62, there's a
Mm-hmm.
there's a breadcrumb for, the twist later to find out that
Yeah.
Aerie is a
So
vampire or whatever. That's really fucking cool.
this was like the first major moment where like, potential vampire. All right, all
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But like you never like take it seriously except for retroactively.
Right, exactly. It's something
Yeah.
that requires you to go through it a second time and notice visual storytelling clues and breadcrumbs that lead you to specific beats in the narrative later on down the road. And that's why I love things like Undead Unluck and Chainsaw Man and whatnot, because it left so many of these, narrative visual breadcrumbs in these ways. You know what I mean? But
Yeah, that was one of the big plot points. Like that point plus the double tap at the end where it's just like boom boom.
yo, the
This is the
ending is
Riri, and that was
nuts.
huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the thing is, exactly at 100 pages, 101. That is halfway through the series. That she falls and is
One more time.
falling
One more
ill.
time on that one. One more time on that one.
So I'm not projecting. I apologize.
No, no, no. It was your internet.
So at page 100,
Yeah.
smack dam, slice down the middle of the one shot. Uh, Aerie is at the beach. They're at the beach. She's falling. It's the first sign that she has only so long to live. And that is the beginning of the parallel between her and the mother.
Yeah. And it's
Straight up.
crazy because it's like you don't know like what's for the movie and what's candid. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And like that's what Fujimoto plays into, is that like we've established this atmosphere in the storytelling that we are going to create a fictional work. But it's being delivered through the lens of, I'm filming this in first person through my camera, so you want to assume that everything that's happening is real and legitimate and actually happening, but you're also kind of conflicted because we already talked about how we're going to be creating our own fictional movie. So it's like, is this all a part of the scene that we constructed in this fictional creative space? Or is this actually happening in real time because this is like reality TV essentially? You know what I mean? So it
Yeah,
really challenges your perception of what's going on at any moment, you know?
it does. Because there were scenes where, like, you know, when you put on the YouTube alert, like, hey, we're going to be doing this thing, there's the picture of her with the giant parfait. Earlier, his mother was like, I'm making a parfait. Would you like some?
Uh-oh.
And then his parents go to the aquarium, and then they have this aquarium date after page 100. After he accepts
Oh,
after he accepts the commission of, I will record your life, your
yo.
last days. The second time he accepts that, they have those, like, the travel montage, the dates and stuff, and they have the things, and it literally mirrors what he recorded the first time around.
Yes.
And for me, that was a major.
I didn't even put this together at all, bro. That's like so cool how he's tying that.
I believe it's like page 8 and page 140.
All right, let me go look. Page 8. So page 8. Yeah. Oh shit. My parents bought me a
Um,
PC because of my smartphone ran out of space. Do 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 do. My mom's all dressed up. It's date night. I'm in the hospital for tests. How many points did you give Dad's cooking? 50. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
because in 140, she's in the hospital bed, just like the page 136 and
Yes,
37. They
yes,
have the parallels on page 5 and 6,
yes.
which is the parfait and
Oh, page
the
5 and
aquarium.
6. Okay, okay,
Yeah,
okay,
page
okay.
5 and 6 is the aquarium parfait thing.
Okay, okay.
Um, and then that parallels to 136.
Oh, wow. Hold on, wait a minute. I'm not even. Oh, I see it. I see it.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, with the cat. Okay. And they're at the aquarium. Uh-oh. I did not notice this like at all at first.
Oh yeah, no. That was something I was gonna touch on later, Yato. Yeah, exactly.
What is
Eri was
Yato
also
talking
nice.
about? Hold on, wait.
Eri was nice to the cat, where the mom told him to cut the cat scene out.
Oh shit. Good shit, Yato.
So,
Great spot, bro.
yep, I was gonna touch on that because it's like she's basically like his mother, in that she is directing him and like
But it's showing like,
ask.
okay, the mom was shitty in these scenes, kind of. A little bit. You know, like not like shitty shitty, but like when you look at it retrospectively, you're like, okay, Ari was cool to the cat, mom was shitty to the cat. You know what I mean? That's like a really,
Tenderness.
yeah, that's a really cool side by side to get. Yeah.
Yes. The way she approached the task, the heavy task, as opposed to just saying, do the thing and not giving him the tools to do so.
Right.
She like Eri actually invested time and effort and like gave him a schedule and like
Yes.
gave him tasks and it's like, hey, break this down. Why is it good? Why is it bad? Tell me the core themes. Like tested him,
Yeah.
like gave him material to work with, as opposed to it's just a difference of like approach, and I love that for
Yeah.
me that was the biggest parallel.
Yeah. That's
Thank you,
really
Yato.
fucking cool, man. Shout out Yato for catalyzing that conversation. That was tight. Should we get into themes? Let's talk about themes, right? Because I don't know. One of the crazier things that this one shot made me think about was, you know, and maybe this is obvious, but was whether or not we were looking at childhood trauma affecting mental health as a major theme, right? Because it's a manga, right? From a creator that historically operates inside of supernatural fiction. You know what I mean? So when the areas of vampire stuff kind of started happening, I immediately switched my brain into suspension of disbelief mode. You know what I mean? So, but
Oh,
I feel like Goodbye Area is actually just a, you know, it's just as realistic as it gets. You know what I mean? And you to possibly develop some kind of severe mental disorder like schizophrenia or something, you know, by the end, or sometime between the death of his mom and the end of the story, or you know,
with the death of all his family.
even yeah, even before the story, you know, started, because we know that the mom sucks or whatever. You know what I mean? Like I was asking myself, like, is Eri actually a vampire? Like, is he actually seeing a person in the hospital or wherever they are, you know, in the
I
last
mean,
scene? You
ah,
know what I mean? Like, it made me wonder, you know what I mean? Because it's like we know that this kid was abused throughout his childhood
mhm.
before the story even started. And then the story starts and they're trying to, you know, act, you know, for the audience in some semblance of a regular nuclear family. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like everything, you know, like you like retrospectively you go back through it and you're like, holy shit, so much of this can be explained by the fact that Yuta was like significantly abused by his mom, you know, in the time leading up to the, you know, current point that the story is kind of like taking place in. You know what I mean? So you consider childhood trauma with the fact that the mom actually dies. The girl comes in at the right moment, like just as he's about to kill himself, and offers him, you know, a new perspective, a new way of life, a new way of thinking about his situation. They fall in love. They develop a relationship that brings the
Mhm.
potential out of Yuta. Everything seems like so perfect for this kid until you find out that Eri is also experiencing the exact same situation as his mom. How much more trauma does that add to the foundation that we know retrospectively after going through the series and looking back at the beginning? You know what I mean? So it's
Oh
like,
God.
how much of this is actually happening is basically my question. Like, is Eri actually a vampire, or is this just what came about from his idea of the perfect film according to Eri while she was living's teachings to him through her film analysis? You know what I mean? Because he went out of his way to say, I want to tell a story about vampires. And then coincidentally, after she dies or whatever, you know, like we find, or when she's about to die or whatever, we find out she's a vampire just coincidentally. Like that's just real. That's just reality. Like I don't know. You know what I mean? Like I read a lot of Moon Knight. You know what I mean? Like I read a lot of like things that go into DID and schizophrenia and like, you know, multiple personality stuff. You know what I mean? So like you read like Jeff Lemire's Moon Knight, and it's like structured in the way of like a Fight Club or something like that, where your perception of what's reality and what's not is constantly challenged. So like when I see this situation and I know that a lot of trauma is fueling a lot of the events in the storytelling, I ask myself, like, okay, yeah, it's normal for me to suspend disbelief when it comes to Fujimoto storytelling, but is this the one that's actually existing in reality, like real reality? And like, is this vampire situation just made up in the mind of someone who experienced a fuck ton of childhood trauma and is finding ways to cope?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. It.
But then also at the same time though, Mello, you pointed out a bunch of like breadcrumb, you know, visual and dialogue, like foreshadowing and storytelling, you know, that like
It's
kind of
really not.
implied that Eri like actually was a vampire. Like when you went back, you know, earlier in like the 60s in page 60 or whatever, and you talked about how
Mhm.
she said, I'm not gonna gain weight by eating this anyway. And we tied that back to like, oh, okay, that makes sense because she's a vampire or whatever. So like
Yeah.
you have shit
So
like that that's constantly challenging the idea of, is this real or is this not? Yeah.
ah man, you know when you were talking about him reliving the trauma of Eri dying in a very similar method to his mother, right? It reminded me of a song called "Cartoons and Cereal"
Oh.
by Kendrick Lamar. and there was a line by, I
Oh,
believe, Gunplay, and it's like, yeah, this is me, no mic, no cameras, no lights, just pain. Mama, how much trauma can I sustain? And
uh-oh.
it made me think of that moment. I was like, ah, but like,
Yeah, dude,
that's
that
just
was
more of an
nice.
aside. That's just more of an aside.
Yeah.
I honestly think that whether or not the story is real and how much is fiction, um, it doesn't actually matter,
Right.
and that the purpose of the story was to obfuscate, give just
Ooh,
enough
hold on.
credence.
The purpose of the story is to what? Your internet dropped out again.
Oh, I believe that the purpose of the story was to give enough credence to both points, that it is both fake and it is all real, and that it is actively trying to blend that idea and add a level of surrealism along with the hyper realistic art to emphasize the emotional points. And
Hmm.
like, it's framed as a documentary at first, but really Fujimoto is taking in the direction of a film, and that the whole thing, the whole one shot as a whole, is a film. Nothing is real, but that's okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's a little, that's a little meta,
Yeah.
but
And hey,
that's
Fujimoto is
my take
known
on
for
it.
metatextual winks and meta commentaries, I want to say. I maybe not known for it, but like it's present in like everything that I've read from Fujimoto Tatsuki. I can
Yeah,
at least identify, you know, at least 3 to 4 metatextual, you know, things inside of his storytelling from story to story. You know what I mean? Like if I really sat down and thought about it, like
hmm,
we talked about it a lot during our Chainsaw Man reviews. I feel like we talked about it like when Look Back was happening, and now we're talking about it here, you know, for Goodbye Airy. You know what I mean? So I want to
yeah.
assume that it exists in Fire Punch as well. That's just like something that Fujimoto knows how to do really well is
There
incorporate that
is,
fourth
there's
wall
elements
metatextual
of,
aspect of what he's trying to tell the audience. Yeah.
I won't tell you about it because I know you haven't read it yet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But there's, I feel like that's the point. The point was because like, by making us ask what parts are real, what parts are fiction, it forces us to pay attention to the story
Yes.
and then have these rereads and then
Yes.
have a more convoluted but more complex and interesting conversation with ourselves and how we respond to the material.
Absolutely.
Um, I think that his goal in the theme was emotional impact.
Okay.
And like that's the ongoing theme, and that this showed the weaknesses within a documentary, and also because that like accuracy does not mean value, right? Because a
Yeah.
documentary like can be accurate, but it can't always show the real sides of a person, right? Like it doesn't
Yes.
show, his documentary style didn't show the real side of who his mother was.
Yeah.
But then he's basically kind of touting the ability of film to say accuracy isn't that important as long as you maintain emotional impact. You can pretend it's accurate, but it's all for the impact.
Yes.
And there was a lot of impact.
That's
The
right.
fact that he had the explosion at the end where
Dude,
the
that
building
ending was
exploded,
like
it
so wild to
killed
me.
me.
Like that was that like splash of like Fujimoto like wackiness, you know what I mean? Like where
That
it
was
was
the
like
pinch of fantasy. I
yeah, and like
love that.
maybe there's like a deep profound like message to be found even inside of like the crazy like final couple of pages or final double spread like of the story or whatever, but like that just felt like that wacky Fujimoto funk to me, you know what I mean, that we can
Yeah.
come to expect
Um,
inside of his storytelling. So
because even the new area, the second area, right,
yes.
was like there's something missing. A pinch of fantasy, and then immediately turn around. The building explodes. We never talked again.
Yeah.
Kaboom! And he's
Yeah.
happy about it.
Yeah. I
Like,
gotta go back and
um,
look at that shit too, because that shit's so drastic, bro.
it
I
is
remember
drastic,
turning
but
the
it still
page and just
works.
being like, okay, 194, goodbye. 195, yeah, goodbye. Splash pages dedicated to the character and the moment. You know what I mean? Back to back
Yeah,
whole page splashes for this goodbye. You know what I mean?
there's only two.
Yeah. And it's like,
There's
boom,
only two.
we go into him walking out and destroying the fucking complex. And it's like, oh my God, it makes you question literally everything that's happened in the
Hmm.
story up until this point.
Yeah. And then is the ending part of a movie? Or was he literally planning to hang himself and then blow up the building to get rid of the evidence and go out with a bang,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
He's like, I lived my life. I felt like explosions were cool, and I tied them to the end of my mother, and I'm done. And I would like to have an explosion at the end of it because explosions are cool. I've kept that,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Nah, dude, that's really
Um,
fucking cool. Um, well, I feel
makes
like
you
this is
wonder.
like it does make you wonder. And I was just going to say, I feel like this is a perfect segue into like the last segment that we have for the conversation for tonight, which is the
Um,
overall message of, Goodbye Eri. And I don't know, even though Fujimoto Tatsuki is kind of like known for like wackier, off the wall writing and plot developments or whatever that make it hard for, some readers to kind of like see beneath the surface of his work and find its deeper themes and messages. I don't know. I think no matter how weird or awkward Fujimoto's stories can be, I still feel like it's very clear that he always has something deep and profound to say inside of his work beneath all of that. You know what I mean? Finding out what those messages are is pretty hard to do, obviously.
yeah.
But no matter what kind of story Tatsuki Fujimoto decides to tell, we know that it's going to be very unique, abstract, and thought provoking. You know what I mean? So, like, that's one thing that I appreciate about his work. But as far as like deciphering a message or a moral inside of Goodbye Eri, I don't know. I was taking my notes and then I
Yeah.
finally got to this like last segment of message and I was like, "Oh my God, why did I decide that this was going to be a segment of conversation?" Because it's just like so I
Um,
guess I was hoping that like it would come to me after the
in the
conversation
moment.
or whatever, like in the
Yeah.
moment. Yeah, but like I cannot for the life of me think of like one proper message or
Couple
one
things.
specific
Because like
thing that he's trying to say. Yeah.
I think there's kind of like two things, and I think that the little bit like those messages and themes kind of tie in together. They might
Sure.
be kind of
Yeah.
one thing. So like the first thing I want to touch on is that this story, the main theme is death and how are people remembered, how are
Yes.
people memorized, and the idea that like bad people can get utilized easily, right? Like there's a line in Rock and Roller by Guy Ritchie,
Rock and
where
roller,
I love that movie.
yes.
It's
I
so
fucking
trash and I love it
love
so
that.
much. My
Yes,
favorite.
bro. Oh my
Uh,
God.
it's my guilty pleasure. But
Yeah.
one of the lines that I remember is a dead rocker's worth more than alive. Worth more dead than alive, you
Yes.
know?
Yes.
And so like, people are willing to forgive the dead so much more than we're willing to forgive the living. Um, so there's a lot of eulogizing into that part. And then like how does one cope with death, how to cope with the idea of like memory and loss and nostalgia, like is the person actually good or are you simply nostalgic for who that person was? And we can talk about like the many deaths that we experience, right? Like you can grow up with someone and realize that the person that you grew up with no longer exists. They are someone completely different and the image that you had of them from your youth is dead, or the physical, actual death, and how that void can affect the landscape socially or within internally within another person, because what you represented to them also dies with you. Um,
Nice.
and then
That
how
was
does that
good.
work?
Oh my God.
The second thing that I want to touch on, which is basically for me the big message and a little bit of the theme, is because like the dad talked about at one point where he's like, how to create something that can
Hold on. Sorry.
touch
Start,
you.
start over. Start over on that point.
Of
Internet.
course,
Internet
of
again.
course.
Yeah.
No worries. Yeah, it's an old building. It's built in like the
Yeah. Yeah.
1930s.
For sure. For sure.
Sorry, folks.
No, you're good. You're good.
But let's see. So the dad was saying, you know, artists can create something that can make one sad or mad. It's only fair that creators can get hurt and response. I don't think that's entirely fair because I think that an audience can be unnecessarily cruel without truly understanding the, you know, the actual intent behind it.
Yes.
But that kind of leads into the point that I'm trying to make of that this story is about choosing your audience and making something for them.
Yeah.
Like, right? Like, he makes a story for his mom and
Yes.
his dad mostly. But the audience that he shows it to is a school who hates and resents him for it and mocks him. It is not the right audience for it.
Right.
But then he creates film and he brings them all to tears. He brings them all to tears. He has the little moment of like little victories when he's like, yes, he films his little victories for her. Like, or the idea like he's pooping in a field and he made those film like or like the films of him pooping. He made that specifically for the audience of Eri because she
Yeah.
cracks up. She rarely laughs out loud except for those moments where he's being stupid and juvenile on purpose for her.
Right.
So like I think the main idea is it doesn't matter if your story is good or bad
Yes.
as long as it's meant for the audience that you made it for.
I love that. And
I
I'm and
think that's the story.
yeah, and you want to know what, dude? Even though I just talked about how like I'm like I don't really know what like a message kind of like looks like for Goodbye Area. After hearing your breakdown, I think I just want to subscribe to what you're talking about right now. But I love that you brought up like the idea of oh my god, what is the name? Death of the author is what you were kind of going into about how it doesn't really matter what the intention of the author is. It really matters. Well, Death of the author says it doesn't matter what the intent or message of the author is. All that matters is, you know, the interpretation of, you know, the work by the audience or whatever. And like that's really cool for Fujimoto Tatsuki specifically because like if you look at anime Twitter, I see a lot of I see a lot of like Chainsaw Man is just a fucking, you know, horny kid trying to touch some titties with chainsaw arms and gore. And it's like, okay, yes, that is the surface level, you know, aesthetic delivery of Chainsaw Man. Congratulations. You analyzed the fucking visual and surface level aspect of the story. Good for you. But like Chainsaw Man is so much more than that. You know what I
But
mean?
then, yeah,
Yeah.
like Chainsaw Man was a story about a young guy who was desperately lacking in things in his life, but didn't know how to articulate what he truly wanted, and people took advantage of that. They presented
Right.
him, hey, this is what you want. They told him,
Yeah.
this is what you want. This is what you should want. And then also the idea of like society constantly bombarding us with the idea, this is what you want, this is what you need. And not he wasn't happy through all of it.
Right. Yeah. And we could talk about, you know, how much deeper Chainsaw Man was than, you know, surface level criticisms, you know, kind of imply or
Yeah.
whatever. But
That's just
like
kind of
the point of
that's the
what
quick easy one.
yeah, the point of what I was saying is that I appreciate how you went into specifically like what Fujimoto Tatsuki was potentially specifically intending for the audience rather than, you know, what it can kind of be perceived as based on like a first time
Yeah.
through or initial perceptions, you know what I mean? And that's why I brought up Death of the Author. So I wasn't trying to say that you were, you know, whatever, but I'm just happy that like you went into like what it could possibly be saying beneath that, you know, surface level initial perception of the story because I feel like Fujimoto Tatsuki's work is regularly misunderstood. So
Yeah.
I'm happy that that we kind of talked
I think
about that for a moment.
I think that like his work I would compare to experimental film in the fact that like it may not always hit the right audience or the right chord with the audience that he does receive. Um
Absolutely.
it yeah, I think that's the core of it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I like I
You
said, bro, like I'm with you like 100% on like your interpretation of the message of Goodbye Airy, even though I didn't have like a
yeah.
well articulated version of my own, You know what I mean? Like I'm totally with you on
Um,
your
and
analysis.
though, and that's just my take. Fujimoto might be trying to aim for something completely different, or like I just wanted to make something where explosions were cool. Like I wanted to do a series that was gonna make you cry, but then also have a moment of levity right afterwards
Right.
in a way that felt surreal and ridiculous. And I want people to have a good time. I wanted people to be on an emotional roller coaster and have a good time by the end of it. And
Yeah.
maybe that was his entire goal, and I
Yeah.
just read too deeply
Well, I
into
mean,
it, right?
Fujimoto's
Like
also
I
the
love
kind of,
that.
yeah, he's also the kind of writer where you can make a pretty safe assumption that even though the final pages of the one shot ended up being very wacky, out of left field, like holy shit, like was that a joke? You know what I mean? Question mark or whatever. At the end of the day, like even though it is wacky in that way, there is still a lot of interpretations that can come from an ending like that. And I think Fujimoto knows that people view his work in a certain way. You know what I mean? Like, okay, he blew up the fucking building and everything is like up in the air now as far as what I originally perceived the story to be. That's Fujimoto for you. But at the end of the day, it's like that fucking final scene of Goodbye Eri, as wacky as it is and as weird as it is and as like out of left field as it kind of was, and how much of levity it felt like, you know, Fujimoto Tatsuki was injecting into the scene, it could, all things considered, after who knows how many analyses of Goodbye Eri we get, someone might be able to tie together the exact rooted, like grounded, defining thing that that scene was supposed to mean for previous themes established in the story. It could all come back
Oh
full
man,
circle after enough analysis, regardless of how wacky it kind of seems at the time. And that's what I
I
love
had a
about Fujimoto. Yeah.
I had a really strange epiphany, and it's kind of silly. I feel silly because it's coming near the end of the series.
Hit me with it.
But what if the whole one shot is a single
Oh,
movie? Are real.
hold
It
on,
is
hold on, hold on, hold
entirely a
on.
movie.
What if the whole one shot is what? You cut out
The
again.
whole one shot is actually just a movie, purely the entire thing, and that the like maybe the young boy isn't even the director. It's just the kid that he's in there, or like the main actor. What if the
Oh
main
man, like
director
what if all of
is
the
the
candid,
old guy?
yeah, like what if all the candid dialogue that we thought was happening off camera was actually just a part of the movie? That like, and like we're literally from start of
Yeah.
Goodbye Eri to the end of it are witnessing a, you know, fictional representation of a story that someone came up with, and not like a, you know, in real time planning of a potential fictional movie where it's
Yeah.
weaving real time things with fictional things back and forth and leaving us confused. Maybe the whole thing from start to finish is just fiction. That's a really
Yeah.
crazy way to look at Goodbye Eri.
And then there's the other one that
Yeah,
I
like
initially
Yuta, or I'm sorry, like I'm sorry to cut you off, but like Yato said, yo, if even Yuta is a character and the mom, et cetera, if everything is viewed through a lens of this is entirely fictional from start to finish, that's insane.
part of me wonders if Yuta, the young Yuta, is doing that stuff, did he hire a guy to play the older version of him so that Eri could be young, and so they faked her death basically for the
Oh,
sake of the film, and then he
yo,
has the final explosion, and Yuta is truly redeemed from having an explosion at the end of his mom's, you know, mother death explosion fiasco,
no,
and
this
so to
is
truly
too
redeem, he hires
crazy,
an older guy to just play that moment.
dude.
So he the I want to make him cry, and then he's like, I got that, ha, I won, but I still want to do it my way. Has the epilogue, adds the explosion.
Dude, we're, I
So
feel like
that's my take on it.
that's fucking
That's how
wild.
I view
No, Mello, we're in too deep. I don't want to.
it.
I feel like you just added like an hour and a half to the conversation with that addition to the combo.
That's my take. I'm leaving it.
Yeah. Boom. Leave it up to
Young Utah
interpretation.
real.
Leave the conversation up to interpretation, just like Fujimoto leaves his work up to the interpretation.
Exactly.
How about we leave off on that? How about we end on that?
Once this hits Patreon and eventually YouTube, please let us know what you guys think.
Yeah.
I've twisted my brain into a pretzel. I hope you're in a similar place.
Yeah.
And I test
Oh.
Kind of because you obviously know mine.
Yeah, hold on. Can you say that again? You kind of like cut out.
Oh yeah, sorry.
It's all good.
So I just wanted to say, like, in the comments, wherever platform you are have it available, I'd like
Mhm.
to hear your comments and takes because you guys obviously already know mine.
Absolutely. Hell yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, man, for sure. Thank you all so much for listening and showing up and pulling up and wanting to be here live for the conversation. I think that'll do it for our discussion and breakdown of Goodbye Airy. We hope you enjoyed it. Let us know if you did, if you're watching on YouTube or Patreon, whatever, like Mello just said. But yeah, man, this was One Shots. This was Goodbye Airy, another remarkable story from the genius mind of Fujimoto Tatsuki. Just to reiterate a little bit of the information that we gave at the beginning of the stream, this will be going on YouTube eventually. It will go on Patreon first, so that our early access people can eat that up for a couple of days before it does eventually premiere on YouTube. But we will be premiering it in a, premiere setting, right? So that it will give you a live chat, and we will be there kicking it with you guys as it premieres to kind of try to, emulate this live scenario as best as we can. But if you want to support what we do directly, you can hit us up on Patreon, and then you'll be able to view any of the Patreon exclusive content that we offer, like our special grade podcast or our early access or our live reading VODs for reactions and things like that. Or you could just wait for it to hit YouTube. Like I said, whatever works best for you. I don't know exactly off the top of my head when it will be hitting YouTube, but it will be about 3 days after it goes live on Patreon. So if tomorrow is Monday and it'll be on Patreon, then that means that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it will be premiering on YouTube. So if you want to catch it on Patreon, great. If not, it'll be on YouTube on Thursday, and we will set it up as a premiere style, kind of situation. So you'll have plenty of notice on Twitter and YouTube before that goes live in the premiere way, over on our YouTube channel. But hit us up on Discord, hit us up on Twitter, hit us up everywhere. Yato's already providing the links down there for you guys, so click on all of those and see what we have going on. All of the new followers, thank you very much. Una S2E, Pentagram 666, Big Morning Star, all of the new followers, thank you all so much. All of the subscribers, Tradition, thanks again for helping us out with some gift subs and whatnot. But that's going to do it for One Shots. That's going to do it for Goodbye Airy. That's going to do it for Project Manga. We're going to go ahead and put it into the ending screen. We're going to go on mute and let you guys have, a little bit of ending music before we officially end the stream and make our leave. But you know where to find us. Discord, Twitter, what have you. But wrapping up for the night, I'm your host, Knox.
And I'm Mello Yenis.
And we will catch you next time. Have a great night, you guys.